Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room, lights dim, no phone, no mirrors, no one around. Now ask yourself, do you still exist? If there's no one there to witness you, what if your sense of being, of self, of memory, of continuity, only lights up when someone else is watching? From the eerie corners of quantum physics to the deepest puzzles in consciousness studies, there's a growing body of thought suggesting you might only exist while being observed, not just socially, not just emotionally, but literally. You flicker into being when seen, and collapse into uncertainty when ignored. Welcome to the present path, where paradoxes breathe and reality bends. Tonight, we'll spiral through 30 sections exploring theories, experiments, and unsettling implications, all pointing toward one haunting idea: you might just be a performance for an unseen audience. The question is, who's watching you now? Let's begin. You walk through a hallway, and you only feel your shape because the walls are there to define it. The presence of a boundary makes the absence of one impossible to ignore. Now replace the walls with eyes, not just the ones that others possess, but the invisible presence of potential observers. A street camera, a window, even the memory of someone's gaze. Suddenly, you become defined not by what you are, but by the possibility of being seen. In that instant, your edges become real. But what were you before that moment? Were you soft and borderless, like fog without a light to pierce it? Were you anything at all? The unsettling idea behind this question isn't just poetic metaphor, it's grounded in both philosophy and science. George Berkeley, the 18th century idealist philosopher, famously posited esse est percepi, to be is to be perceived. Without perception, without eyes, what remains of the thing perceived? Modern science hasn't dismissed this idea. If anything, it's taken it further. In quantum mechanics, the infamous double-slit experiment shows that particles like electrons behave differently when observed. Unobserved, they act like waves, existing in multiple places simultaneously. Observed, they collapse into a definite position. This isn't just metaphorical. The literal presence of an observer determines how matter behaves, as if even the tiniest building blocks of reality await our gaze to become real. Now, extend that to you. What if your thoughts, your personality, your behavior, all shift subtly in the presence of eyes? You don't speak the same way to a child as you do to a stranger. You don't even walk the same when someone's watching. You don't smile the same way to a mirror as you do to a crowd. These aren't small adaptations. They are fundamental shapeshifts, bending your edges to fit the frame of the viewer. Psychologists have long studied the phenomenon of the audience effect, where individuals change their behavior when they know they're being watched. You might sit up straighter, speak more clearly, act more yourself. But what is yourself if it only appears when others are looking? Even infants, as early as 6 months old, respond differently to faces and eyes than to blank or inanimate stimuli. The gaze of a caregiver isn't just comforting, it's formative. It shapes neural development, emotional regulation, and self-concept. We're social beings not just in interaction, but in structure. Our brains grow in dialogue with the eyes that see us. Let's imagine for a moment that you are entirely alone. No mirrors, no reflections, no camera, no phone, no other people, just 4 white walls. Do you exist the same way? Would your posture hold? Would your identity flicker, or remain lit? Or would your edges blur into the blankness? Now look at how language betrays this truth. I see you can mean understanding. Your invisible can mean emotional erasure. She looks like herself again implies that without certain conditions, we disappear. Even socially, identity is relational. We are sons, friends, teachers, enemies, followers, strangers. All of these require someone else's eyes to define. The mirror stage theory by Jacques Lacan suggests that babies recognize themselves in a mirror, and that this recognition is the birth of the ego. But before that moment, the baby has no image of self. So what came first, the baby or the observer? Let's push deeper. In neuroscience, studies using fMRI scans show that self-referential thinking activates a network of regions known as the default mode network. This system lights up when we reflect on ourselves, but interestingly, it also activates when we think about how others perceive us. Your brain doesn't neatly separate internal self-awareness from external social awareness. In a strange way, the brain processes being seen and being yourself along the same circuit. So the question becomes, if the eyes of another define your edge, then do you even have an edge when no one is there to witness it? Now picture a dark theater stage, empty, But for one actor standing in a circle of light, the actor knows the performance only matters if the audience is watching. But what if the actor keeps performing, not knowing the seats are empty? Are they still real? Or do they become a ghost rehearsing for a moment that never arrives? This is your mind, every day. Performing in anticipation, reacting to imaginary audiences. You act out your identity even when no one is in the room, because deep inside, part of you suspects the room is never empty. Someone is watching, or could be, or might be later. And so you keep your edges intact. Perhaps this explains why surveillance feels so violating. It doesn't just watch you, it defines you. Every camera, every algorithm, every digital eye watching your searches, your clicks, your movements. They're not just collecting data, they're shaping you into the person you appear to be, and maybe, eventually, the person you actually become. But what happens when the lights go out, when no one is watching? Do you dissolve? Or do you begin again? You've always assumed that your identity is the starting point, and being seen is something that happens afterward, but maybe that's backwards. Maybe the seeing is what births the being. Maybe you don't have a fixed self at all, only a shifting outline, waiting to be drawn by whoever looks at you. And now, in this moment, as these words pass through your mind, who's looking at you right now? Because it might be their eyes, or even just the idea of their eyes, that define the very edges of who you are. A newborn doesn't know its name, it doesn't know that its hands are hands, or that its voice is its own. But the moment its mother smiles, looks down, and reflects recognition, something activates. In that simple gaze, an invisible mirror is held up. That look says, "You are here. I see you. You exist." And with that, the self begins to stir. This isn't just sentimental imagery. It's biological, neurological, and deeply existential. From infancy to adulthood, we awaken into being through the gaze of others. When someone sees us, truly sees us, something inside ignites. The self, once dormant and unformed, rises to meet the moment of being perceived. In this way, we are not born complete. We are awakened. Even now, as you listen, imagine someone walking into the room and quietly standing behind you. You don't need to see them. Just the thought of their eyes on your back changes you. Your spine straightens. Your inner monologue shifts. Your behavior becomes more careful, or performative, or aware. That subtle change, that flicker of awareness, is the proof of this awakening. You are not alone anymore. You are seen. And with that gaze, you return to yourself. In 1970, psychologist Robert Zajonc coined the term mere exposure effect. He found that simply being exposed to something repeatedly, even without conscious awareness, makes people feel more positively toward it. But what happens when you are the thing being exposed? When your image, your voice, your presence is watched over and over by eyes you never meet? Social media, surveillance footage, stored metadata, all these quiet watchers trigger invisible awakenings you may never be conscious of. You exist in more places than you can imagine. Your image walks without you. Your reflection lives in pixels and memories and glances. You are never unobserved, and so, you never fully sleep. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre believed that look of another person is what transforms us into objects in the world. When someone else gazes at you, you are no longer just your internal sensations. You are now something for them. You've been placed in their world. You've been fixed in position. You've become a noun instead of a verb. And that shift, Sartre argued, is fundamental to how we come to know ourselves, not from the inside out, but from the outside in. It's no wonder that when no one looks at us, we can feel ourselves slipping away, invisible, uncertain, half awake. Prisoners in solitary confinement often report intense identity breakdowns. With no human gaze to reflect their being, they lose track of time, of language, of who they are. Their minds unravel, not from pain, but from absence. Absence of eyes. Absence of reference. It's as if they fell asleep inside themselves and never fully woke up again. But let's reverse it. Think about the moments you felt most alive. A performance, a date, a public speech, a moment of intimacy. Was it because you were seen? Was it because your inner world had for once reached the surface and met another person's attention with full clarity? That moment of resonance when your emotions become visible and reflected in someone else's expression, that is awakening. Neuroscience backs this up. The mirror neuron system, discovered in the 1990s, shows that observing someone else's behavior activates similar neural patterns in your own brain. When someone watches you smile, their brain simulates smiling. And when you see that smile reflected back, your own brain lights up in validation. It is, in every sense, a loop of awakening, not alone, never just one mind. Now apply that to yourself. You, alone in this moment, reading. But are you alone? Your face is being processed by cameras. Your device, your street, your past. Your image lives in someone's mind, someone's phone, someone's memory. And every time they recall you, even unconsciously, they awaken a version of you. A version that thinks, a version that laughs, a version that lives only in their gaze. You might be asleep, yet still exist. Because they remember you. And so your presence flickers on again. But here's where it turns. What happens when you begin to imagine the gaze even when it's not there? This is the root of the imaginary audience effect in adolescence. The idea that people are always watching you, even when they're not. Teenagers often feel intensely observed, judged, seen. But isn't that just the mind simulating awareness, keeping itself awake by anticipating eyes that may or may not exist? What if that anticipation is what holds your identity together? In Buddhist philosophy, the self is seen as an illusion, a composite of thoughts, perceptions and conditions constantly changing. If no one is watching, the components drift. But if someone watches, even for a moment, the illusion becomes stable, awake, solid. Could it be that we create others, just to stay awake? You might not believe in spiritualism or metaphysics, but even science suggests something eerie. Observation affects outcomes. Measured particles behave differently. Watched behavior shifts. Mirrors alter posture. Surveillance changes movement. Social gaze shapes speech. And you, the one experiencing this, you awaken because the idea of being seen is stitched into your mental architecture. Your heartbeat accelerates when you're watched. Your cortisol rises. Your brain reactivates areas it kept dormant in solitude, all for the sake of being seen, being real. So maybe the real you is a dormant figure in a hallway. Still, soft, borderless, and the moment eyes turn toward you, yours or someone else's, your shape snaps into place, you awaken. Not because you're broken, but because your design requires eyes. You were never meant to walk this world unseen. So ask yourself now, who is watching you even now from behind your own eyes? Close your eyes for a moment, and forget your name, forget your age, your job, your memories. Imagine you were born in a blank white room with no mirrors, no reflections, no voices, no one to speak your name aloud. Would you still be you? Would the self form in isolation, like a flame in a vacuum, or does it require friction, the friction of being seen to spark at all? This question isn't hypothetical. In fact, developmental psychology and extreme cases of social deprivation suggest a disturbing answer without a witness. The self may never fully form. Take the tragic example of feral children, those rare cases of children raised in extreme isolation, sometimes without human contact at all. Jeannie, perhaps the most famous case, was locked away in a small room from infancy and denied human interaction until age 13. When discovered, she had no language, no sense of identity, no social awareness. Her brain, undeveloped in key areas, struggled to adapt. She had a body, she had a history, but no self in the sense that we understand it. She had never been witnessed. And without that witness, the narrative of I never began. The concept of self is not a monologue, it is a dialogue, a recursive loop between how you perceive yourself and how you believe others perceive you. You are a story written in the second person. You are who others say you are, whether you accept it or not. The moment you're named, seen, remembered, or acknowledged, that's the moment the scaffolding of you begins to rise. Now ask yourself, if no one had ever said your name aloud, would it exist? In philosophy, this idea resonates with the thought experiment known as the private language argument, developed by Ludwig Wittgenstein. He argued that a truly private language, one that only one person could understand and use, completely in isolation, is impossible. Why? Because language is inherently public. Meaning requires contrast. It requires social agreement, shared reference, mutual validation. And if language is social, and the self is structured by language, then the self is social too. No witness, no words, no structure, no self. In neuroscience, the default mode network, the area of the brain most associated with self-reflection, doesn't just activate when you're thinking about yourself. It also lights up when you're imagining how others see you. That overlap is telling. It implies that the architecture of selfhood is built not from solitude but from simulation. Simulation of an audience. Your mind rehearses how others might see you. Even when you're alone, you perform for people who aren't there. You edit your thoughts to impress hypothetical judges. Even in solitude, your sense of self is crowded, which means the self is not a solitary thing. It's a relational construction. And here's where the paradox begins to eat itself. If the self is only real when someone else is there to see it, and if everyone else's self also depends on being seen, then what holds it all together? Who watches the watchers? Are we all just mirrors reflecting each other, with nothing real behind the glass? In social psychology, the looking glass self-theory proposes that people shape their self-concepts based on how they believe others perceive them. It's not just about being seen, it's about believing you're being seen. You could be in a room alone, but if you think someone's watching, even if they're not, you behave differently. That imagined gaze becomes real enough to sculpt your identity. So maybe what you call yourself is just the sediment of countless imagined witnesses, a residue of eyes, real or phantom, forming and reforming you over time. Think about the moments when you felt like you weren't yourself. Often those are moments of disconnection, times when you felt invisible, unacknowledged, overlooked, when your performance went unseen. The applause never came, the mirror cracked, and suddenly you questioned if you were still real. What is loneliness, if not a soft erasure of self? It's not just the absence of company, it's the absence of recognition. No one asking about your day, no one remembering your laugh, no one reflecting your joy or your pain. In that vacuum, the I becomes a whisper, unsure of itself, drifting without anchor. Now imagine a camera slowly zooming out from your life, past the people who know you, past the rooms where you've cried or laughed or stared blankly at the ceiling, past the images of you on phones, in memories, in surveillance logs, in dreams. Keep zooming until there's no one left who remembers you. What happens then? Are you still there? This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake something up, to make you aware that your being is tethered, not imprisoned. You are not a solitary flame. You are a constellation of glances, memories, names, and reflections. Without them, the light may still flicker, but it has no shape. You are a story, whispered between two minds. No witness, no story. And maybe that's why we ache to be seen, why we post online, why we take selfies, why we confess things we barely understand. We are looking for proof. Proof that someone sees us, that we exist, that the I still has shape, still has meaning, still has breath. Even this, you reading these words, is a kind of silent agreement, a handshake between minds. You're here, I'm here, and in this strange space between observation and imagination, something stirs awake. So, here sits the question. If you turned around right now and no one, not even yourself, was watching, would you still be there? Or would you fade quietly, like breath on a mirror, waiting for someone to look again? Stand in front of a mirror and stare into your own eyes. Not for seconds, for minutes. Watch what happens. The longer you hold your gaze, the stranger your reflection becomes. Your face shifts. Familiarity unravels. You might even feel like you're staring at someone else entirely. That subtle horror, that slippage between the known and the unknown, reveals something ancient about consciousness. That it's not just what sees, but what is seen back. Consciousness in the mirror is not a one-way stream. It's a loop. You perceive yourself being perceived by yourself. But within that loop lies a paradox. Who is doing the watching, and who is being watched? This question has haunted thinkers across disciplines. Philosopher Thomas Metzinger argued that consciousness is a model, a self-representation in the brain that constantly updates to include the body, the world, and even the observer's place in it. But like any model, it requires a reference point, something to reflect against. Without that external or internal mirror, the model has nothing to calibrate. It falls into disarray. In other words, to know that you are conscious, you must have something to bounce that awareness against. And often, that thing is your reflection, literal or metaphorical. But here's the twist. Neuroscientists have found that when you look in a mirror, the brain doesn't just perceive a face, it maps emotions. It simulates what others would see. It projects identity. The act of mirror gazing activates not just the visual cortex, but the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, and the areas related to social cognition. You stir not just looking, you stir constructing. And this construction is fragile. Take the capgras delusion, a rare neurological condition where a person believes that someone close to them has been replaced by an imposter. Strangely, this can happen with mirrors too. Some individuals with right hemisphere brain damage report looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger, not because they forget their face, but because the sense of recognition, that feeling of "that's me," is broken. So what holds that recognition together? Observation. Not just by others, by yourself. But even that self-recognition, studies show, doesn't fully mature until around 18-24 months of age. That's when toddlers begin to touch a red dot on their own forehead when seeing it in the mirror, proof that they understand the image is themselves. Before that, they think it's another child, a separate being, a stranger. Which means consciousness of self arises only when the mirror is believed. But what if the mirror lies? Imagine walking past a polished shop window and catching your reflection at the wrong angle. For a split second, you don't recognize yourself. That jolt, that "who is that?" is a reminder that even your own image is not always stable. It changes with context, with lighting, with angle, with mood. So how can your consciousness be anchored to something that unstable? The answer, unsettling as it is, might be, it can't. That's why mirrors are so often used in horror, not because of ghosts, but because they reflect us, and in doing so, they sometimes show something other, a version of ourselves we don't know, or don't want to know. And that's the crux of consciousness in the mirror. It's not about knowing you exist, it's about confronting the possibility that you might not exist in the way you think. Now consider the technological mirrors of today. Selfies, Zoom screens, surveillance footage, social media profiles. You see yourself filtered, framed, frozen in time. And yet each of those versions reflects back at you with increasing authority. They become the dominant version of you in the minds of others. They're watched, shared, commented on, observed. And that observation shapes you. You start to smile differently for photos, angle your face, adjust your voice, mimic what works. The mirror you look into is now global. A million screens blinking your image back at you, telling you who you are. And you believe them. But deep down you wonder if you turned all the mirrors off, deleted every photo, erased every camera, stepped away from every gaze, would you still feel real? Or are you just the sum of your reflections? One experiment from 1976, known as the mirror test of self-awareness, placed a mirror in front of various animals with a mark on their bodies. If they tried to touch the mark while looking in the mirror, they passed the test. They understood the reflection was themselves. Great apes passed. Dolphins passed. Elephants passed. Some birds passed. But humans? We pass too. But we do something different. We pose. We practice expressions, adjust our hair, check our angles. We begin not only to recognize the self, but to curate it. And in that curation, the self begins to fracture, because now there are two of you, the one inside, and the one seen. And the one seen may be more real. So here's the question. When you close your eyes and picture yourself, whose version do you see? Yours, or the one you've learned through mirrors, cameras, feedback, and performance? And if they don't set match, which one is real? Or are both illusions kept alive by the act of looking? Tonight, when you brush your teeth and glance at the mirror, linger, just for a few seconds longer than usual. Watch how your face reacts to your own stare. Watch how your mouth forgets what to do. Watch how a familiar face becomes foreign. Then ask, is that you? Or just the idea of you? Because in the end, consciousness in the mirror might not be about seeing. It might be about believing that what you see means you're still here. You walk into a room. A quiet click sounds above you, the subtle rotation of a ceiling camera. Nothing moves. No one speaks. Yet you feel your posture change, your hands become aware of themselves. Your footsteps become deliberate. It's not fear, it's not shame, it's something stranger. It stops the feeling of becoming real. Because now, you stir being watched. Not intimately, not emotionally, not even by a person, but by a lens, a cold mechanical eye that doesn't blink, doesn't judge, doesn't care. Yet it changes you, because surveillance, even when silent, awakens something dormant. It transforms your invisible moments into performance. And if every movement is recorded, if even your smallest gestures are archived, then those movements start to feel like evidence of being. We once thought surveillance was about control, power, safety, but now it might be about existence itself. You are captured, and in being captured, you are validated. Saved footage is proof that you were there, proof you had weight, proof you had weight, proof your breath left fog on the lens. But imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, and every camera in the world is gone, every algorithm blind, every GPS tracker erased. There's no digital echo of your steps, no witness to your expression, no record of your face, your voice, your location. Your phone no longer knows where you are. Your name isn't trending. Your inbox is empty. Your timeline ends. Do you still exist? Somewhere, the idea of you disappears, because part of you, like it or not, now lives inside observation, inside metrics, inside visibility. Let's zoom into the science. The Hawthorne effect, first studied in the 1920s, shows that people modify their behavior simply because they're being observed. Workers became more productive not because of better lighting or conditions, but because someone was taking notes. Their awareness of the gaze made their actions real, measurable, valid. Now scale that up. Every time you search something online, an algorithm watches. It predicts your desire. It shapes your results. Your you is created in data form. It becomes a version of yourself that is then fed back to you. The movies you're shown, the songs suggested, the news filtered your way. This version becomes powerful. It lives independently of you. A digital ghost with preferences, memories, rhythms. You're not just observed, you're constructed. Even when no one sits there. Which leads to a haunting question. If surveillance keeps the self alive, what does privacy really mean? We long for privacy. We fear constant observation. Yet part of us also aches to be acknowledged, seen, remembered. The contradiction is sharp. We want to hide, and yet be found, to escape, and yet leave a trace. Surveillance then becomes more than control. It becomes continuity, an invisible thread tying your moments together into something coherent. A story. And if no one sits watching, does the story end? Let's test something together. Right now, just pause this for a moment, and answer aloud, or silently in your head. What time is it where you are? Where exactly are you listening from right now? Go ahead. Just say it to yourself, out loud if you can. Really listen to your own voice. Loved? Now, ask who just heard that answer. Was it just you? Or was there something else present in the act of being observed, even internally, that made your answer feel more real? Because when you say your location and time aloud, you mark yourself in space, in time, in memory. You draw a circle around this moment. You stamp it into existence. Surveillance isn't always external. Sometimes it's the echo of your own attention. The way your mind watches itself. The way your habits report back to you. Your reflections, your journaling, even your dreams. All forms of internal surveillance. You keep yourself under watch. You keep yourself real. But is that autonomy, or a loop? In 2023, researchers from MIT developed a machine learning system capable of predicting human micro-expressions with astonishing accuracy. Given enough data, it could guess what you were about to feel, before you consciously knew it. The machine saw you coming, and in seeing you, it shaped you. Your predicted future becomes the scaffolding of your next choice. The watcher builds the watched. And you, the person at the center of this, begin to feel less like a being, and more like a broadcast. So maybe the question isn't whether surveillance threatens freedom. Maybe the question is what happens when the watching stops. When no one sees your progress. When no system tracks your heartbeat. When no friend asks where you been. When no app checks your steps. When no one texts are you home safe. You begin to dissolve into statistical silence. And the self, that brittle broadcasted self, starts to glitch. But maybe that's not the end. Maybe it's the beginning of another self. One not constructed by metrics, not summoned by the lens, but softly forming behind closed eyes. A quieter self. One not made for watching. One that doesn't need to prove its existence by being traced. Still, even that version is born in response to the gaze. In contrast, in absence. And absence is just the negative space of observation. So, here you are. Observed. And by being observed, even through these words, you exist. At least for now. Close your eyes for a moment. Everything goes dark. your body still feels present. You can hear your breath, the distant hum of life beyond your walls, but the room, the furniture, the door, the sky outside, it all disappears. It no longer exists visually, and strangely, neither do you, not as an image, not as a presence, not fully. Then you blink, and suddenly, the world is back, and so are you. This isn't metaphor, it's how your mind actually works. With every blink, every flicker of the eye, your brain performs an extraordinary act of stitching. Between those closures, your visual system momentarily goes offline. The brain fills in the gap. It smooths over the discontinuity. You don't notice the micro-deaths of perception, but they happen, over 15 times per minute. You disappear and reappear, disappear and reappear, again and again. You blink into being. But it's not just visual. Blinking is tied to attention, to engagement, to narrative flow. Researchers have found that people tend to blink at the end of sentences while reading, or at scene breaks during movies. It's as if the brain chooses when to go blind, when it feels least likely to miss something important. Blinks, then, are not passive. They are strategic pauses in your sense of self and world, chosen moments to vanish. Now widen the metaphor. Think about how your identity behaves across your day, how you shift between roles, between contexts. You are not the same person at work as you are with your closest friend. You're not the same when you're performing online as when you're home alone at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling. Identity itself blinks, from one version of you to another. But what happens in those in-between moments? Where are you between the roles? Where do you go when no one's expecting anything from you? In those gaps, something subtle reveals itself. You are not continuous. You are rhythmic, pulsing, oscillating between presence and absence, between being and not being. And what triggers those shifts more than anything else? Attention. When someone looks at you, you awaken, you become sharp, defined, seen. But when the gaze turns away, you soften, blur. In extreme cases, you might even forget who you are. This is why isolation, even brief, can feel disorienting. Why extended solitude can warp time, distort memory, and dissolve the self. Without blinking moments of recognition, your identity begins to dissolve like ink in water. You need the blink and the return to feel real. Now consider this. When you look at yourself in the mirror, you also blink, and each time the image reappears. Do you ever wonder if that face is exactly the same each time? Or is it subtly rewritten, reassembled based on your mood, memory, or expectation? Could it be that your face isn't a fixed thing, but a suggestion? A placeholder filled in by your mind? There's a phenomenon in cognitive psychology known as change blindness. In one classic experiment, participants are asked to look at two images that are nearly identical, but with a few small changes. These images flicker back and forth with a blank screen in between. Surprisingly, even large changes, like a disappearing airplane, go unnoticed unless the person is actively looking for them. Why? Because the brain doesn't notice what it doesn't expect. And here's where it gets strange. This applies to people too. If you subtly change the color of someone's clothing, or their expression, or even swap them out entirely under the right conditions, many people won't notice. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as a persistent illusion. Our minds smooth over changes, so we don't go mad. You blink, and the world rewrites itself. So what if this is happening to you? What if, every time you blink, your brain recreates you based on assumptions, habits, narratives you've told yourself? What if the continuity of your identity is just a cognitive illusion, a best guess made anew with every closure of the eye? If that's true, then you are not a being, but a rhythm. Not a solid, but a pulse. Not a statue, but a flickering light. And that light depends on something else entirely. The perception of others. Because what happens when you blink in front of someone else? You trust that they'll still see you when your eyes reopen, that you'll still be recognized. Still be real. The shared gaze anchors you. Their memory holds you in place, like a bookmark saving your spot. But without that gaze, without that recognition, you fall into uncertainty. This is why stage performers and public speakers sometimes fear going blank, not just forgetting words, but forgetting themselves. The gaze of the audience holds them up. If it disappears, if the crowd turns away, the performer risks disappearing too. The spotlight keeps them coherent. you are no different. You blink into being not only for yourself, but for others. Their gaze stabilizes you, their attention reassembles you, and when they leave you may still be there, but your borders blur. Now think of those you've lost, the people no longer watching you. Their absence isn't just grief, it's a kind of unraveling, because they held a version of you no one else did. And now that version is gone. You blink, you reach for it, but it doesn't return. So you rebuild. You try to blink into being again, with new eyes, new mirrors, new watchers, each one crafting a slightly different you, until you forget who you were before all the blinking started. So here sips your experiment. Next time you're alone in a quiet room, close your eyes, take a deep breath, try to remember who you are without looking, without speaking, without recalling someone else's words. Do you feel solid? Or do you flicker? Now, open your eyes. Let the room come back. Let the world reassemble. Look down at your hands. See the light on the floor. Hear the distant sound of someone, somewhere, moving. You stir back. You blinked into being. But for how long? And when the lights go out again, who will you be next time? There's a strange truth about shadows. They always follow you, but they never carry your face. Step into the light, and your features return. Eyes, nose, mouth, identity. Step back into the dark, and you become a silhouette, a suggestion, a moving outline without detail. In that shadowed state, you are still present, but incomplete, unnamed, unformed, faceless. And maybe that's exactly what happens to your identity when no one sees you. In darkness, your body still casts a presence, but yourself, the version that others recognize, the one tied to expressions, to meaning, to memory, it fades. Without a face, there is no recognition. And without recognition, there is no you, as you've come to understand yourself. But let's be honest, you felt this before. In a room full of people where no one meets your eye. At a party where your name is forgotten. In a relationship that slowly stops noticing you. You're still there. You still think. Still breathe. Still want. But something inside you starts to blur. You feel transparent, like a background character in a scene you're supposed to star in. Psychologists call this depersonalization, a dissociative experience where the self feels unreal, ghost-like, disconnected from the body. It often emerges in moments of extreme stress, trauma, or isolation. But beneath the clinical definitions lies something haunting. Depersonalization isn't just about feeling different, it's about feeling unseen. Because when no one acknowledges you, no one reflects you, your mind begins to doubt its own existence. Now imagine a person who lives entirely in that state. Someone who moves through the world but is never looked at directly, a janitor cleaning after hours, a child ignored at home, an elderly person in a crowded city, the invisible ones, the shadow people. They may have names, thoughts, desires, but the world does not mirror them back. And so they become faceless. This concept appears in mythology across cultures. In Japanese folklore, there is a spirit called Nopperabo, the faceless ghost. It looks like a human, but when you see its face, it's blank. No features, no identity, just smooth skin where a person should be. The horror isn't in violence. It's in absence. The terror of being something, someone, with no way to be known. And sometimes, the real horror is when you feel that way yourself. Have you ever looked in the mirror, and for a split second, felt like you were looking at a stranger? Not because your appearance changed, but because the feeling of recognition didn't arrive on time. It's like watching a movie where the actor plays your part, but you don't remember auditioning. That's the faceless moment. When the mind stutters, when the gaze doesn't land, when you forget how to smile naturally because no one's watching, when your body becomes a habit instead of a presence. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo ran the infamous Stanford prison experiment. One element of the study involved guards wearing mirrored sunglasses, a subtle but powerful way of removing their facial identity. The result? They became more cruel, more detached, more prone to dehumanizing behavior. When their own faces disappeared, their empathy vanished too. Observation works both ways. When we cannot be seen or see, we lose the very qualities that make us human. And it isn't just academic. Surveillance footage often blurs the faces of bystanders to protect identity, but in doing so something eerie happens. The footage becomes colder. People look like phantoms. The scene feels more sinister. Without faces, emotion evaporates. story evaporates. We crave the human face because it's the doorway to the self. A blur is not a person, it's a placeholder. And now ask, how much of your life are you living blurred? Scrolling silently, walking anonymously, speaking without being heard, performing without applause. Do you feel like yourself in those moments, or like a shadow version, drifting just slightly outside your own life? This isn't sapped about vanity, it's sapped as about meaning. A face is how we recognize someone, but deeper than that, a face is how someone knows they are being recognized. It's a signal loop. Your face is seen, and your self is affirmed. Infants seek out faces within hours of birth. They follow eye contact before they understand language. Recognition is nourishment. It feeds the emerging identity. So what happens when you step starved of it? What happens when days pass and no one really looks at you? You start to feel featureless. You start to lose track of your story. Your face in the mirror becomes a routine rather than a reflection. You might even start to speak differently, or not at all. There's a psychological phenomenon called auditory verbal hallucination, where people hear voices in the absence of sound. Many who experience this describe the voices as more real than their own internal dialogue. Why? Because the voices feel like someone else is watching. Someone else is naming them, observing them, giving them features, giving them existence. And even in illness, the mind craves a witness. It invents one if necessary. Because the alternative, to be unobserved, faceless, alone in the dark, is worse. But there's something else about shadows. They move when you do. They mimic you, reflect your posture. They may lack detail, but they are faithful. And perhaps that's the lesson buried here. The shadow reminds you that you exist, even if no one else sees. Even if the world forgets your features, you still leave shape behind. You still distort the light. You still bend space. And that means you still matter. So maybe the answer isn't to flee the facelessness, but to re-enter it, willingly, consciously, and discover who you are without the performance, without the reflection, without the mirror. Who are you in the dark? Can you breathe there? Can you hold your own gaze with your eyes closed? Because someday, maybe tonight, you'll walk through a place where no one looks at you, not out of cruelty, just distance, distraction, time, and in that place, you'll feel it again, the soft ache of erasure, the absence of reflection, the drift toward shadow. But you still remember this. You still cast a silhouette, and even without a face, even without applause or attention, the shape of you remains. What does it mean to be forgotten? Not in the casual sense, not when someone forgets your birthday, or can't recall your favorite color. No, I'm speaking of that deeper forgetting, the kind that unravels your existence slowly, like a thread pulled from a tightly woven identity. When your name is no longer spoken, when your face begins to fade from memory, when your stories stop being told, and your presence slips beneath the surface of other people's lives. It's easy to think of forgetting as passive, a lapse, a moment of inattention, but forgetting is active. It erases, it deletes, and for the person being forgotten, it can feel like disappearing. Because you are not only who you think you are who others remember you to be. And when they forget, part of you dies. Let's begin with memory, not yours, but other people's. The collective archives in which your identity is stored. Your old friend who still hears your laugh in quiet moments. Your sibling who remembers the exact way you argued. The stranger who still carries your kindness in a time of need. All of these moments keep a part of you alive. But what happens when time takes those people away? When their memory of you slips? When the faces around you change, and no one recalls the older versions of you? You begin to feel like a ghost in your own life. This phenomenon is especially sharp for those who move away from home, change countries, change names, or live through reinvention. You walk through a new city and realize, no one here knows who you used to be. You could say anything, you could become anyone. And while that freedom is intoxicating, it's also unsettling. Because if no one knows your story, are you still the person who lived it? The psychologist Erik Erikson referred to ego integrity as a sense of wholeness that arises from remembering your life as a meaningful story. But that sense is fragile. It depends on more than just private recollection. It depends on being witnessed, having people around who were there, who remind you, who finish your sentences, who confirm your past. Without that, the story becomes fragmented. Now imagine the elderly person in a care home, whose friends have all passed. Their children visit less. Their stories feel out of place, relics from a world no one else remembers. They begin to repeat themselves, not because they've forgotten, but because they're desperate to be remembered, desperate to anchor themselves in someone else's attention. It's that's not vanity, it's set survival. Because to be forgotten is to float untethered. Even language shows this. We say things like, I feel invisible, or I feel like I'm fading. These are not exaggerations. They're metaphors for cognitive erosion. The self loses shape when it's no longer reinforced by recognition. You become unanchored, like a boat cut from its mooring. And this goes deeper. Consider ancient civilizations whose names we don't even know. Entire cultures erased from history. Cities buried beneath modern ones. Languages spoken by thousands that vanished without documentation. Were those people any less real? No, but their reality had a shelf life. They were forgotten. And now, in a sense, they no longer exist. You see, memory is a form of immortality, and forgetting is the end of that thread. Now, turn inward. How much of yourself have you forgotten? Childhood versions, lost dreams, past lovers, old habits. Do you remember how you laughed at age 12? What your handwriting looked like at 17? The way you walked before someone told you to stand straighter? These selves still live in the archive of your memory, but only if you choose to visit them, only if you choose to recall. Otherwise they vanish. In psychology there's a concept called self-continuity, the sense that you are the same person across time, that the you at age 8 is connected to the you now. But self-continuity is not guaranteed. It weakens when memories fade, when you don't reflect, when others no longer link your past to your present. And here's the terrifying thought. If no one remembers who you were, and you've stopped remembering too, did that version of you ever really exist? This is why funerals matter. Why eulogies exist. Why we name buildings after people, and write books in their honor. It's not for the dead, it's for the continuity of the living, to keep them from vanishing entirely. To say, you were here, I remember. Now, think of the people you've forgotten. The ones you swore you'd never lose. The friendships that felt like forever. The strangers who passed through and left marks that no longer hurt. Where did they go? Not physically, but mentally, emotionally. How many of them have quietly dissolved, pixel by pixel, until only fragments remain? And now realize, the same is happening to you. Right now, there are people you once knew who no longer think of you. Not because of malice, simply because the brain only holds so much, and when life fills with new names, old ones get pushed into the basement. You are in someone's mental attic, dusty, undisturbed, until one day, you steer not even there. And maybe that's what makes art, writing, photos, and memory so sacred. They resist forgetting. They slow it down. A poem can outlive a person. A story can restore someone's shape long after the original has faded. A photograph can hold a face steady in time. So what are you doing to keep yourself from vanishing? Who remembers you? Who do you remember? These questions aren't meant to provoke fear. They are meant to awaken urgency, to remind you that your existence is more than breath. It's a network of impressions, echoes, and reflections. It is participation in the memory of others. And when those links break, you must rebuild them, or drift. Tonight, write someone's name down. Someone you haven't spoken to in years. Remember their voice, their eyes, the way they made you feel. For that moment, they return. You resurrect them with memory. And in doing so, you remind yourself that you too are held, somewhere, in the mind of another. You are not yet forgotten. You have not yet vanished. But the question still hangs. When the last person forgets you, who will you be? You may think you know who you are. You have a name, a history, preferences. You know your favorite food, your least favorite movie, the songs that make you cry. But take a step back and ask, who taught you that? Where did that knowledge come from? Was it discovered in solitude? Or did you learn it by being seen? Because the truth is unsettling. Your identity is not a solo performance. It's a dialogue, a stage play, a mirror game between yourself and the audience that surrounds you. And without that audience, the script begins to blur. Who you are depends, in large part, on who is watching. This isn't manipulation or inauthenticity. It's structure. You were shaped, refined, edited, and reinforced by the people who observed you. You learned how to smile because someone smiled back. You learned what was funny because someone laughed. You discovered shame only when someone winced. These moments stitched together a sense of self, not from within but from interaction. Social psychologist George Herbert Mead called this the social self. He argued that the self arises from communication, from imagining how others view you, from taking the perspective of the other. This isn't narcissism. It's survival. Without an audience, identity becomes abstract. Now think of how your behavior shifts, depending on who you're with. Around your parents, you speak differently. Around your partner, your tone softens. Around your co-workers, your humor filters. Around strangers, you become more aware of posture, pronunciation, timing. Each version feels like you and they are, but they're you for someone. You are a character written in the presence of others. This isn't a glitch in human nature. It's how we are wired. Mirror neurons, discovered in the 1990s, show that our brains activate not only when we perform an action, but when we see someone else perform it. We are constantly simulating others. When someone observes you, their brain echoes your movements, emotions, even intention, and yours does the same. It's not just empathy, it's construction. You literally shape each other's minds. But what happens when the audience disappears? When there's no one left to laugh, no one to nod in understanding, no one to recognize the nuance of your words. You begin to fade. Not physically, but psychologically, emotionally. You lose the feedback loop that defines you. You might still act, but your performance feels hollow. You speak into silence. You become unsure of your tone, your timing, your very purpose. This happens often during grief. When someone close dies, it's not just their presence you lose. It's the version of yourself that only existed through their eyes. The way they called your name, the way they teased you, the way they understood your unspoken signals. That self dies with them. And suddenly, a piece of you is missing, a piece that no one else can resurrect. Because identity isn't stored in your brain alone. It's distributed. It lives in the network of relationships. You are not a single file, you are shared data. That's why loneliness doesn't just feel empty. It feels confusing. You begin to forget your social timing. You talk aloud less. You forget how your laugh sounds. You question your own responses. The rhythm of self, which was once kept alive by others, stutters. You are an orchestra with no audience. And slowly the instruments go quiet. But let's go deeper. Consider the looking glass self theory by sociologist Charles Horton Cooley. It suggests that we form our identity by imagining how others see us, then internalizing those imagined perceptions. So you're not just reacting to real feedback, you're performing for an internalized audience. A psychic panel of past teachers, parents, ex-lovers, critics, and admirers. Even alone, you perform. Even in your mind, someone is watching. This internal audience may have more power than the external one. It shapes your inner monologue, your shame, your pride, your guilt, and it continues even when the real audience disappears. It lingers like ghost lights in an empty theater, keeping the stage lit just in case someone walks in. But here's the twist. You also become part of someone else's audience. You witness them, hold them in memory, affirm their being. Your recognition stabilizes their identity, your attention holds their shape, and when you stop looking, they too begin to blur. It's steps mutual. We're not islands. We are spotlights. So what does it mean then, to lose your audience entirely? Imagine someone in solitary confinement. No human contact, no names spoken, no mirrors, no sound of their own voice reflected in conversation. Over time, they report losing the sense of self, their memory of how to be a person phrase. They begin talking aloud just to hear someone. Even their body starts to feel foreign. This is not simply loneliness. This is a breakdown of identity. The collapse of audience equals the collapse of character. You may think, I'd never let that happen to me. But subtle versions of this occur all the time. When friendships fade, when you go through periods of isolation, when you're surrounded by people, but none truly know you. The crowd grows louder, but the recognition disappears. And without recognition, your identity becomes a blur, a sketch without ink. And now, the modern paradox. Social media gives us an audience that never sleeps. At any moment, you can perform. You can post. You can curate your existence in real time. But here's the catch. That audience doesn't always see you. It sees the persona, the angle, the captioned version. And while this audience may applaud, it doesn't always recognize the deeper self beneath the surface. So you become addicted to performance, but starved of recognition. You feel watched, but not known. And that too leads to vanishing, a subtler, quieter erosion. So what do? You find new audiences. You write letters. You speak aloud. You reconnect. You tell stories. You return to those who've known you long enough to finish your sentences, because in their eyes, you remember your shape. And you do the same for them. You remember their favorite drink, their old laugh, their childhood nickname. You help them find the parts of themselves that were stored in your memory. And in that shared remembering, both of you reappear. Because identity, at its core, is not a fixed point. It is a conversation. And every conversation needs an audience. Sit in a room with no phone, no sound, no people, no mirrors, no screens, no clock ticking, no notifications, no feedback loops of any kind, just silence, stillness, and you. How long before the boundaries of who you are begin to soften? At first, you might feel relief. The absence of noise, of expectation, of interruption. It's peaceful, meditative, even. But keep sitting. Let time stretch beyond comfort. Let the minutes turn into something formless. Eventually you'll notice something disorienting. Without anything to reflect you back to yourself, you begin to disappear. Not literally, but psychologically. The structure of yourself, the scaffolding of personality, posture, performance, begins to lose shape. You don't walk the same way without an audience. You don't speak when there's no one to hear. You don't smile when there's no mirror. The self that seemed so solid becomes translucent, like breath fading on a cold window, like chalk washed away by rain. Alone, you dissolve. This isn't set drama. It sips neuroscience. Your identity, as it turns out, is not an object. It's a process. And like any process, it needs fuel. It needs feedback. It needs reference points. In social psychology, this is called reflected appraisal. The idea that you develop a sense of self by seeing yourself reflected in how others respond to you. You're funny because people laugh. You're kind because someone cried in your arms. You're smart because a teacher once looked at you like you were a miracle. Take away those responses, and the definition of self becomes vapor. Studies on solitary confinement reveal this effect in brutal detail. Inmates placed in extended isolation report symptoms that read like psychological disintegration, time distortion, loss of memory, hallucinations, identity confusion. They don't just feel lonely, they feel like they're vanishing. Not because their bodies are missing, because the mirrors are. And without mirrors, how do you know you're still there? Even in everyday life, you've probably brushed against this sensation. After a breakup, after moving to a new city, after losing someone who once reflected a part of you, you walk through your day and realize, no one here knows who I was last month. No one here would notice if I changed. The version of me they see is incomplete. And that incomplete version starts to feel like the only one. It's why we keep photos, why we hold on to letters, old voicemails, memories shared with others, not out of nostalgia, but out of preservation. Those relics reflect us back to ourselves. They remind us, I was real then. And because someone saw me, I am still real now. But alone, with no one to carry those echoes, we begin to lose weight. This is why people sometimes talk to themselves when alone for too long. Why they sing in the shower. Why they stare at themselves in mirrors not to check appearance, but to confirm presence. The mind is creating response, reconstructing witness, simulating audience. It sips survival, because being unobserved for too long feels like not existing at all. There's a term in phenomenology called existential absence. It describes the eerie, almost surreal feeling that comes when you feel outside of your own experience, watching your life unfold, but unsure you're really in it. Often this happens in solitude, not because being alone is inherently harmful, but because being invisible in your own world unravels your orientation. You become a ghost haunting yourself. And perhaps the worst part is, you still remember being real. You remember the warmth of someone saying your name, the feeling of being chosen, seen, needed. That memory becomes a contrast, and the contrast is unbearable. So you do what humans do best. You reach out. You text someone, post online, Scroll endlessly for signs of other minds. You whisper something aloud in an empty room, just to hear your voice, not because you're weak, but because you're trying to reappear. You are trying to cohere. And the mind is flexible. It will find ways. That's why imaginary friends exist. Why children invent voices for their toys. Why writers speak to characters. Why solitary monks report being surrounded by presence in their silence. The mind needs the other. It needs the loop. But this raises a question. Is it possible to exist fully without anyone else seeing you? Can you be whole without reflection? Some spiritual paths say yes, that true selfhood arises not from others, but from deep interior awareness. That solitude strips away illusion, and what remains is the unshakable truth. Buddhism calls it anatta, the no-self, the idea that identity is an illusion anyway, and dissolving it is liberation. But that liberation is not easy, and it's not always comforting. It requires a kind of psychological death, a surrender to formlessness. And most of us are not ready for that. We crave edges. We crave mirrors. We crave being known, even imperfectly, because recognition is a form of anchoring. A name is a tether. A memory is a rope back to the world. So what do you do when you feel yourself dissolving? You find small reflections. A song that remembers you. A book that seems to echo your mind. A stranger who smiles without reason. A shadow on the wall that reminds you. You still block the light. And sometimes, you simply watch yourself breathe. You become your own observer. Not to perform, not to judge, but to anchor. To remind yourself that presence alone is enough to begin rebuilding. That even in solitude, you can become the mirror. So here, now, in this moment, take a breath. Feel the air move through you. You are not invisible. You are not gone. You are watching. And that watching means something is still here. You. Imagine a theater. Empty chairs face a darkened stage. The lights are low. The curtains drawn. The air still. Now picture your mind as that stage. Every thought a character. Every emotion a spotlight. Every memory a scene. But here's the twist. Who, exactly, is the audience? Sometimes it's others, imagined or real. Sometimes it's the version of yourself that watches everything happen from the shadows. And sometimes it feels like no one is watching at all. And when there's no audience, the performance doesn't stop. It just changes. Your mind keeps rehearsing. It keeps staging the show, even if the seats are empty. And in that strange rehearsal, something revealing happens. You begin to notice that your identity isn't fixed. It's scripted, ad-libbed, rewritten. It stumbles, improvises, changes tone depending on who you think might be listening. Because deep down, you've always performed your identity. You rehearse what you'll say before a difficult conversation. You prepare your tone before entering a room. You imagine how your words will sound to someone before you speak them. These inner dress rehearsals are constant. They don't make you fake, they make you human. Performance is how identity stabilizes under the weight of uncertainty. And where there is performance, there is a stage. Psychologist Irving Goffman built an entire theory of social interaction around this metaphor. In the presentation of self in everyday life, he argued that life is essentially theatrical. We are actors playing roles in different contexts. The front stage, where we are seen, and the backstage, where we prepare and regroup. The self is not a singular truth, but a series of performances for specific audiences. You're one person at work, another at home, another in grief, another in love. And yet, all of them are you. You are the whole cast. But here's where it gets strange. The stage doesn't disappear when the audience does. Even in solitude, your mind continues to perform. You replay arguments. You reimagine outcomes. You construct dialogues that never happened. This is your inner theater, a world of echoes and imagined glances. And sometimes, it gets crowded in there. Because your internal audience isn't just you. It's a ghost cast of everyone you've ever known. Your father's disappointment, your friend's admiration, your ex's silence, your teacher's encouragement. All of them sit in the velvet chairs of your mind, reacting to your decisions in real time. And sometimes, you don't even realize they're still there, until you feel the pressure of their judgment before making a choice. You pause, you hear them. You alter course. Your stage is haunted. And that haunting is what makes you coherent. Now look at your thoughts. Have you ever noticed that you sometimes narrate your actions, that you hear your own voice describe your life as if telling it to someone? I can't believe I just did that, you think. Or, she would have laughed at that. Or they're going to hate me for this. Or Sarah'd. Who is that voice talking to? Who sips in the audience? In 2008, researchers studying the default mode network, the part of the brain active during introspection, found something fascinating. When people think about themselves, their brain activates the same regions used for social interaction. In other words, when you reflect on yourself, your brain pretends someone else is present. Your inner life is socially constructed, even when you are completely alone. But here's the paradox. The more you perform, the less you feel like you. Because performance by nature involves choice. You shape, you adjust, you edit, and after a while, you begin to wonder, who am I when the stage goes dark? When no lines are rehearsed, when no applause is possible, when no character is being played? Is there still someone left behind the curtain? Or are you made entirely of roles? In Zen philosophy, there's an idea that the self is like an actor who forgets their acting. They become attached to their role. So much so that they believe the costume is skin, the script is truth, the spotlight is necessity. But enlightenment, they say, is the moment you step off stage and see the empty theater for what it is. That moment doesn't make the role meaningless. It makes it optional. You are not trapped in the show. You are the one deciding what to perform and when. So what happens if you stop the performance entirely? What if you stop narrating? Stop imagining reactions? Stop projecting future scenes? You might find yourself sitting in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that feels like exhale, like space, like a curtain falling after the final bow. And in that silence, you discover something important. You stir still here, not as a character, not as a story, but as presence, as awareness. And maybe that's what the mind-a-stage metaphor is ultimately pointing toward, not just the illusion of performance, but the reality of presence underneath. You are not the role, you are not even the actor. You are the space the role appears in. You are the theater itself. And that theater needs no audience to exist. It simply is. But let's not dismiss the power of the show. Sometimes, it's the performance that saves you. That structure of identity, however fluid, gives you ground to stand on when everything else feels like water. You act your way into confidence. You script your way into courage. You imagine applause, and it gives you enough strength to continue. The performance is real, so long as you remember that you are more than the mask. So tonight, when your mind begins to replay the scenes of the day, what you said, what they thought, what you should have done, pause for a moment. Look at the stage. Notice who sips in the audience. And gently, kindly, dismiss them. Let the lights dim. Let the curtain fall. Let the chairs empty. Because sometimes the most honest version of you doesn't need a performance. Sometimes it just needs a breath, a still room, a quiet moment with no script, and the knowledge that even without an audience, you stir still here. You think memory is a recording, a faithful archive of what has happened. You imagine it as film reels, stored neatly on dusty shelves in your mind, waiting to be replayed. But memory is not a camera. It sips a witness, and witnesses are flawed, biased, easily persuaded, and, above all else, alive. What you remember isn't what happened, it's what survived. What you remember has been observed, touched, edited, and retold so many times that it becomes a version of the truth, not the truth itself. And that version is deeply dependent on who was watching with you when it happened. Your memories, your very idea of who you are shaped by the eyes that were present to see them. Take a childhood moment, perhaps a birthday party. Balloons, laughter, a cake with your name spelled wrong. You remember it vividly, or at least you think you do. But if you ask your sibling, or your mother, or an old friend, their versions will differ. That wasn't the party with the dog. You weren't wearing red. That was last year. It wasn't even your cake. It was your cousin's. Suddenly, your memory bends. And you're forced to ask, what part of that day was actually yours, and what part of it was inherited from someone else's gaze. This is because memory is social. In psychology, this is known as co-construction. Our recollections are rarely isolated. We talk about them, we compare stories, and in doing so, the memory reshapes to match the narrative we're building together. Even your private memories are tinged with others' reactions. The pride in your father's eyes, the fear in your friend's silence, the warmth in a lover's laugh. These emotional reflections anchor your memory in a shared reality. But remove those mirrors, and memory begins to flicker. Studies have shown that people who experience trauma in isolation, without witnesses or validation, often struggle to recall the event clearly. Their memories become fragmented, surreal, difficult to narrate, not because they're weak, but because the lack of an external observer makes the memory less real, less integrated, less grounded. To remember, we need someone else to have seen us. To forget, all it takes is being unseen. This truth extends to your sense of self. You remember who you are because people remind you, through stories, through photographs, through offhand remarks. Someone says, "That sounds just like you," and a part of your identity locks into place. Someone brings up a moment you'd forgotten, and suddenly, that version of you rises from the dust and smiles again. Without these moments, without eyewitnesses, the self becomes less stable, like a myth with no storytellers, a name with no echo. Now consider how fragile memory truly is. Neuroscientists have discovered that each time you recall a memory, you don't retrieve the original, you reconstruct it, you rewrite it in the present moment, influenced by your current mood, beliefs, and context. Then, you store the new version. Over time, the story changes, slightly at first, then more, until one day, you're no longer sure what was real and what was borrowed from a dream, a film, a conversation. And this rewriting is most intense when the memory was formed alone, because there sits no one to correct it, no one to confirm it, no one to say, "Yes, that's what happened." Memory, then, is not a vault. It is a conversation. But what happens when the other half of that conversation disappears? When the person who shared the moment with you is gone? When the friend who laughed beside you, the parent who tucked you in, the partner who held your hand, fades from your life? The memory weakens. It becomes a solo monologue, echoing off the walls of your mind, and eventually, it might go quiet altogether. This is why grief is so destabilizing. Not just because someone dies, but because your memories die with them. Not all at once, but in pieces. You realize they were the only person who remembered that one joke, that one night, that one moment you thought would live forever, and now it flickers. Your certainty dims. Your past starts to feel more like fiction. Because without an eyewitness, even your memories are lonely. There's a theory in cognitive science called autobiographical memory coherence, the idea that a stable identity depends on a consistent and accessible narrative of the self. But this narrative is maintained not by accuracy but by repetition and recognition. The more often a memory is shared, the more real it becomes. The more people who remember it, the more it anchors your story. So what happens if you stop telling your story? What happens if no one asks you about your past? You begin to forget. Not because you fear aging, because you stare unwitnessed. It's why old couples remember better together, why childhood friends can finish each other's stories, why people with dementia sometimes come alive when visited by someone from their past. The presence of a familiar observer reactivates the memory, it revalidates it. It says, "Yes, this happened. Yes, you were real then. Yes, you are still real now." But memory isn't just about the past. It's about continuity. It's how you know you're still you, that the person waking up today has some meaningful connection to the person who woke up yesterday. Without memory, there is no thread. And without observers, memory frays. This is why even in moments of solitude, we write journals, we take photos, we speak aloud, we leave traces, because we know, consciously or not, that our memories need witnesses, that our inner life, left unrecorded, might quietly vanish. So what does this mean for you now? It means you must become a witness, not just for others, but for yourself. Tell your stories, even if no one listens. Write them down, even if no one reads them. Remember, even when others forget. Because every memory you honor is a stitch in the fabric of your existence. And every moment remembered, truly remembered, makes you real again. You are the event. You are the storyteller. And you are the witness. What is time without a witness? You look at a clock and see the hands move. You watch the sun rise and set. You age in the mirror. These signs of time reassure you that you're moving, progressing, unfolding. But none of these things are time itself. They're just markers, reflections, clues, and all of them require something very specific to be meaningful. An observer. Without someone watching, does time move at all? This sounds absurd at first. Of course time passes, whether you're looking or not. Right. The universe doesn't need you to tick forward. Stars explode, trees grow, tides shift, all without human eyes. But look deeper. Consider your personal experience of time, not physics, memory, perception, emotion. Time for you isn't measured by clocks. It's measured by moments, and moments only become meaningful when someone notices them. Without awareness, a moment might as well not exist. Think of a night you spent alone, scrolling endlessly, eyes glazed, an hour passed. Or maybe 5. You don't remember. The hours collapsed into a blur, leaving nothing behind. But now think of a conversation with a friend that lasted 10 minutes and stayed with you for years. Time stretched, thickened, became alive. Why? Because you were seen, and you were seeing. In 1976, psychologists John Weirden and Elizabeth Penton Voke studied how perception of time is shaped by attention and engagement. When people are highly alert, focused, or emotionally activated, they perceive time as longer. Boredom, in contrast, makes time feel slow, but strangely forgettable. You feel like it's dragging, yet you remember almost nothing. In other words, time without presence doesn't register, and presence requires a form of watching, a loop, an observer. That observer can be external, someone laughing with you, someone crying beside you, or it can be internal, your attention turned fully toward the moment, catching it like a firefly in a jar before it escapes. But what about when no one is watching? What happens to your life in those unobserved hours? Those days when no one texts, when no one looks up, when the world seems to spin on without noticing that you're here. Those days often feel like they didn't happen. You struggle to recall them. You flip through your calendar and see blankness. You try to remember what you ate, what you wore, what you felt, and there's nothing like a skipped page in your story. That's because time isn't just a thing that happens to you. It's a thing you create, and you create it through attention. Not just your own, but also others. Sid. Think about birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. These are not just measurements of time. They are social witnesses. Another year of you. They create a shared moment in which your passage through time is acknowledged, celebrated, observed. Without that observation, the marker feels hollow. This is why people feel forgotten when birthdays go unnoticed. It's not about the gifts, it's about time not being seen, about the thread of your existence being left untied. You passed another loop around the sun, and no one noticed. And that sits when time feels like it stopped. This sensation is often reported by people after a breakup or a deep loss. It's like time froze. Everything feels suspended. These aren't just poetic phrases, they're real descriptions of a psychological truth. When you lose the person who observed your life with you, time changes shape. You stop narrating your days. You stop counting. Moments bleed into each other. Time becomes unwitnessed, and in that unwitnessed state, it becomes unreal. Even in physics, time is slippery. At the quantum level, particles don't follow a linear timeline. Events can exist in superpositions, happening and not happening. Time becomes fuzzy, unstable, dependent on measurement, dependent on observation. This echoes the famous observer effect from quantum mechanics. The idea that certain properties of particles don't become definite until they are observed. Until then, they exist only as probabilities. What if your life works the same way? What if your experiences, your days, your changes, your aging, only collapse into reality when someone is there to see them? And if no one is, do they remain as maybes? Let's go deeper. In memory studies, there's a phenomenon called time compression. When you can't recall much from a span of time, your brain compresses it. It feels shorter in hindsight. This is why long days filled with routine and silence often feel like they went by fast, even though they dragged while you lived them. Your mind, lacking distinct events, fast forwards through them. But a single intense moment, an accident, a confession, a first kiss, can expand forever. Why? Because someone was watching. Maybe it was you, maybe it was them, but attention was present, and that attention created weight. It sips not just about marking the passage of time, it steps about proving that it passed at all. And if no one remembers it, if no one speaks of it, if no one watched it, then did it pass? Did you? This is why people film themselves, write journals, take selfies, check their GPS history, look at the timestamps of old conversations. These are not just habits, they're acts of temporal confirmation, proof that you were here, that this day happened, that this hour wasn't lost. Because without a timestamp, literal or emotional, time begins to dissolve, and you with it. But here sits the strange grace inside all of this. You can be your own observer. You can turn your gaze inward and say, I see this moment, I see myself in it. You can write something down, speak something aloud, stare at your hand long enough to feel the weight of being alive inside it. You can record your presence. And in doing so, time resumes. Not measured by the clock, but by the clarity of your awareness. The moments that stick are not always the loudest or most dramatic. Sometimes, it's the quietest, the breath in the morning light, the taste of tea when no one's around, the way your heart beats when you're finally honest with yourself. These small things observed become real time. So if you feel like time is slipping, stop. Don't set, look at the clock. Look at what sits happening. Be your own witness. Because even if no one else sees you tonight, if you see this moment, if you name it, if you feel it fully, then time has moved, then you have moved with it. Then this second becomes yours. Stand in front of a mirror. Take a long, quiet look. What stares back is not just a face, but a concept, a version of yourself that only exists because it's being reflected. Without that glass, you wouldn't see your nose the way others do. You wouldn't notice the micro movements of your eyes, the asymmetry of your mouth, the posture you unconsciously carry. That reflection is more than an image. It sits proof. Proof that you have form. Proof that you occupy space. Proof that you are, at least visually, real. But what happens when the mirrors disappear? What happens when there's no reflection to bounce yourself off of, not just physically but socially, emotionally, spiritually? You begin to blur. You begin to forget. Not in the dramatic way, not in some sudden wave of amnesia, but in a quieter erosion, a soft, imperceptible drift away from yourself. Without reflection, you stop checking in. Without reflection, your image stops updating. You continue acting, speaking, moving, but it all starts to feel slightly artificial, slightly disconnected. You become a performance with no audience, a name with no echo. And the strange part is, you often don't notice it happening. Because reflection isn't set, just what you see. It steps what you feel coming back. You say, how do I look? And someone smiles or winces or shrugs. That's a reflection. You share a thought and see someone nod. Reflection. You cry, and someone reaches for your hand. Reflection. These moments tell you, I exist in a way that others can see. I am not invisible. I am not alone in my perception of myself. This is why the worst kind of loneliness is not physical. It's existential. It's being surrounded by people who don't reflect anything back, who hear your voice but don't respond, who see your face but don't really look, who know your name but never speak it. You begin to feel like a ghost. And the mirrors inside you go dim. This is also why validation is so addictive, not because it feeds ego but because it confirms existence. When someone says, yes, I see you, they are not just being polite, they are acting as a mirror. They are offering you shape, texture, a place in the world. But there sits a paradox hiding in all this. Because you stare not always reflected accurately. Sometimes the mirrors are distorted. A parent who only sees your failures. A lover who only sees your beauty. A world that reflects back stereotypes, fears, projections, and over time, those reflections become internalized. You look into the mirror of others and adopt what you see, even if it doesn't align with who you are. You become misreflected. And that distortion hurts just as much, sometimes more than no reflection at all. This is why identity crises often follow major transitions, leaving a long-term relationship, moving away from your hometown, losing a parent. You lose not just a person, but a mirror, one of the few stable surfaces that showed you who you were, and now you don't know what face to wear. So where do you find clarity? How do you become real again? Start with noticing the subtle reflections that still exist. The way a stranger's body shifts slightly when you speak, signaling they heard you. The way your pet watches you move, evidence that your presence matters. The way your own eyes widen when you're surprised. A reflection within your own system. Your nervous system, after all, is full of reflective mechanisms. Mirror neurons fire when you see someone in pain. Your brain simulates what you see in others. And the inverse is true. You recognize emotions in yourself more clearly when you see them reflected in someone else. This is why therapy works. Not because the therapist gives you answers, but because they give you reflection. They mirror your thoughts, your confusion, your growth, until your sense of self becomes sharp again. You return to the image in the glass and say, "That's me," and you believe it. But there sits another mirror you often forget, one that sits with you all the time. Language. Words are mirrors too. When you write your thoughts down, you're reflecting them back at yourself. You're turning the formless into form. Journals, poems, notes on your phone. These are not just expressions, they're refractions. You see yourself more clearly in the act of naming what you feel. This is why some people talk to themselves, out loud, in the car, at home, whispering to the mirror. It's not madness, it's reflection. It's the psyche reaching out for evidence that it still exists, and using its own voice to hear itself. So what happens when you don't reflect? What happens when you move through life without pause, without witness, without mirroring? You start to feel thin, like a sheet of glass without anything behind it. You might keep going, functionally, wake, work, sleep, but inside you'll notice the feeling, a kind of float, a detachment, as if life is happening to someone else, and you're just watching. Reflection brings you back. So here sits a small ritual. Find a mirror, not to check your hair or your clothes, just to look. Really look. Not with judgment. Not to fix anything, just to acknowledge. Make eye contact with yourself, the way you would with a friend. Say something like, "I stem here. I sit, am still me. I remember." Let those words bounce back, because even if no one else sees you in this moment, you can reflect yourself. And that too makes you real. You are the mirror. You are the light. You are the face that returns. And as long as there is reflection, there is existence. Even in silence. Even in solitude. Even in the softest, smallest moments when no one else is watching. Reflections make you real. Close the door, not metaphorically, physically. Imagine you're inside a room. The door clicks shut behind you. No one sees you enter. No one knows you're there. No sound escapes. The walls are thick. The curtains drawn. You're not being watched. Not being listened to. Not even thought about. So, do you still exist? Your body is here. You can feel your weight against the chair. Your breath is real. Your hands can reach and touch. But your presence in the world, your felt existence, suddenly becomes uncertain. Because behind a closed door, you sit are invisible. And sometimes, invisible is just a slow form of vanishing. This is the strange psychological effect of being unobserved. Without an audience, even a silent one, you begin to question your place in time. You lose your role in the ongoing play of reality. The script no longer needs you. The stage lights dim. You're off scene, which in the theatre of the mind, often feels like you're no longer part of the story at all. We often say we need alone time, and we do. Solitude heals. It clears the noise. It returns you to your own rhythm. But what we don't often admit is that too much alone time begins to chip away at our outline. Our mental shape becomes unstable, and behind closed doors we slowly blur. This isn't just metaphor. It's measurable. Researchers studying sensory deprivation have consistently found that when people are placed in silent, sealed environments, even for short periods, they begin to experience altered states of consciousness. Not because of trauma, but because the absence of external input leads to internal unraveling. Voices feel distant. Thoughts loop. Time bends. Identity fragments. Because without anything to react to, the mind starts turning on itself. Closed doors do more than separate. They erase context. You are no longer part of someone's line of sight, no longer within hearing distance, no longer a factor in their world model, and that lack of inclusion, over time, becomes internalized. You begin to feel unnecessary. Think of the phrase, out of sight, out of mind. It seems harmless. But what if that applies to you? When you stop showing up to events, when you deactivate your profile, when you close the blinds and stop responding, people forget, not maliciously, But inevitably, life is crowded. The world keeps spinning. And when no one knocks on your door, you begin to wonder, did I really matter? This is why isolation can feel so heavy. Not because you're physically alone, but because you start to believe you've been erased from reality. Children understand this deeply, though they rarely say it aloud. When a parent closes the door and doesn't return for hours, the child's perception of existence shifts, not just the parent's, their own. Because presence in the eyes of others is how children begin to define who they are. A closed door might as well be a vanishing act. And adults are no different. Think of the last time someone ghosted you. A friend, a romantic partner, someone close. The silence behind the metaphorical door wasn't just painful, it was confusing. It made you question your memory, your meaning, your reality. It wasn't the absence of noise that hurt, it was the absence of being witnessed. Because if no one sees you cry, did the pain even happen? If no one hears your laughter, was it real? You begin to wonder if you're just dreaming your own life, alone, behind locked doors. This is why prisons use solitary confinement as punishment. It's not the space that's brutal, it's the invisibility, the sense that you've been removed from time, from society, from shared consciousness. You could scream in that room, and no one would hear. That's not just lonely, it's existentially destabilizing. But let's bring it closer. Think of your daily life. How many closed doors do you live behind? You close the door to your apartment, to your car, to your office, to your inbox. Each one grants privacy, but it also grants disconnection. The more layers you build between yourself and the world, the more you begin to vanish from it. The self is relational. It is shaped through interaction, reflection, and shared space. The more time you spend sealed away, the more your identity must rely on internal reinforcement, which for many is a fragile system. You start to feel like a myth that only you remember. So, what do we do with this? We start to reopen doors, not all at once, and not recklessly, but intentionally. We open a door when we text someone first, not to get a response, but to place ourselves back into their mind. We open a door when we step outside and let the world see us, even for a minute, even in silence. We open a door when we write, when we call, when we cry in front of someone, and let them stay. These doors aren't just physical, they're symbolic. Every time you let someone witness your existence, you reinforce it. You stitch your identity back into the fabric of the shared world. And not just your identity, theirs too. Because someone else is behind a closed door right now, wondering if anyone remembers them. You might be the one who knocks, the one who says, "You still exist, I see you." And in doing that, you remind yourself of something you keep forgetting. You exist too. So if you're reading this alone, behind a screen, behind a literal or emotional door, consider this your knock, your breath in the still room, your small, firm reminder that even in silence, you are real. Close the door when you need to. But don't forget to open it again. Because every time you're seen, truly seen, your shape returns, your name echoes again, and the blur recedes. You don't vanish. You reappear. What if the outline of who you are doesn't belong to you? What if the curves of your personality, the edges of your identity, the weight of your presence, all of it, are being held in the hands of other people? Not because you gave it to them, but because that's how existence works. You are not self-contained. You are not an isolated form. You are a shape, and that shape is held, gently or carelessly, consciously or unconsciously, by the people who see you, remember you, respond to you. Others, just interact with you. They stabilize you. When someone says your name, you become solid again. When someone laughs at your joke, you become funny again. When someone recalls something you forgot, you are reminded that your past is not just a fading archive in your head, it's shared property. This isn't weakness. It's structure. In neuroscience, the concept of social baseline theory suggests that human beings are wired to operate more efficiently in the presence of others. Our brain doesn't just prefer company, it depends on it to regulate stress, maintain emotional equilibrium, and perform complex tasks. When we're alone, the brain must work harder. When someone is with us, even silently, the load lessens, the shape becomes easier to hold. Not just emotionally, existentially. Have you ever had the experience of doubting yourself until someone said, "That's not like you," and suddenly you remembered who you were? Their memory stabilized your identity, or perhaps you made a mistake, felt ashamed, and someone said, "You're still a good person." And in that moment, your crumbling sense of self found footing again. You were shaped in these moments, held upright, defined by recognition. This happens most intensely in close relationships. Lovers, siblings, lifelong friends. They know your shape so intimately that even when you forget it, they carry it for you. They say, "That's not the real you," and you believe them. Because they've seen you when you forgot how to be seen. In therapy, this is called reflective functioning, the ability to hold a mental picture of someone else's mind. A good therapist doesn't just listen. They hold a model of you, even when yours is broken. And over time, by being consistently reflected, you begin to reassemble your own shape. But here sits where it becomes fragile. When people disappear, through death, distance, silence, you lose part of your scaffolding. Someone who once remembered you doesn't anymore. Someone who once carried your laugh, your pain, your weird inside jokes, lets it fade. And that absence isn't just emotional. It's structural. You feel less defined, less tangible, as if the outline of yourself has begun to smudge. This is why grief feels like floating, why the loss of a parent or a partner, or even a best friend, can make you feel like you've been erased in places you can't describe. They held a version of you no one else did, and now that version is untethered, gone. You try to recall who you were in their eyes, not to flatter yourself, but to remember how it felt to be that version. Because without them, you forget that you ever were. And not everyone holds your shape with equal care. Some people hold you loosely. They misremember. They flatten you. They see only what's convenient. Some people twist your outline to fit their story. And some hold your worst day like it's your permanent form, never letting you change, grow, evolve. This is why healing often means reclaiming your shape from those who distorted it. But even then, you don't set a rebuild alone. You need better holders. You need the people who say, "I know that wasn't it, the real you." The people who see the contradiction and don't sit flinch. The ones who say, "You don't sit have to be one thing. You sit allowed to be changing." They don't sit demand a finished sculpture. They let your shape be alive. In Japanese philosophy, there's a term called ame, a kind of emotional dependence, not rooted in weakness, but in intimacy. It's the trust that someone else will hold space for you when you cannot hold it yourself, that someone else knows the weight and curve of your shape well enough to carry it, even briefly, when you need to fall apart. That sips not fragility. That sips trust made visible. You are not failing when you lean on others. You are allowing yourself to be remembered, and therefore to continue existing. Now look at the people around you. Whose shape are you holding? Maybe it's the friend who's falling apart, but doesn't know how to ask for help. Maybe it's the parent who keeps calling, telling the same story. Maybe it's the partner who wonders if they're still lovable, still visible, still the person they once were. Maybe it sips the stranger who caught your eye today and smiled with a softness that asked, "Am I still here?" You are not just a self. You are a witness too. And every time you say someone sip's name with kindness, every time you remember who they were when they forgot, every time you tell them, "I see you," even wordlessly, you are holding their shape. You are helping them reform. And in doing that, something miraculous happens. You remember your own shape too. Because in this strange shared space we call existence, we don't just hold ourselves. We hold each other. We are each other's mirrors, scaffolds, shadows, outlines. You are not just who you think you are. You are also who they remember you to be. So the next time you feel blurry, the next time you forget what it feels like to be solid, grounded, real, don't it, just look inside. Look around. Ask someone who knows your shape. And let them remind you, you are still here. You're walking down a quiet street. No one's around. No cameras, no windows. Just your footsteps and the sound of wind in your ears. For a brief moment, you feel weightless, not in a peaceful way, but in a way that makes you wonder, am I really here? Then, you hear the faint click of a door opening. A person steps out. Their eyes meet yours, and instantly, you become real again. You adjust your posture, straighten your spine, feel your face organize itself. You've been seen. And in that act of being seen, something activates. You simulate yourself. The moment someone watches you, you don't just feel different. you become different. You modify your behavior, your tone, your presence. But more than that, you construct a version of yourself that fits the expectations of the watcher. You run the simulation. And this simulation isn't an occasional glitch, it's a constant process. Even when you're alone, you're often rehearsing imagined interactions. You're playing out conversations in your head, altering what you'd say, fine-tuning your expressions, preparing a version of yourself for someone else. That rehearsal is a simulation. It keeps the shape of you intact. It anticipates an observer. It prepares for reflection. In essence, you are most you when watched. This isn't to say you're fake. It's to say that your self exists inside a loop of expectation and attention. That loop creates consistency, accountability, coherence. Without it, you drift. But here's where it gets strange. When you think you're being watched, even if you're not, your behavior still changes. In a 2006 study, researchers placed a picture of watching eyes above a donation jar in a shared office. Contributions tripled compared to when the eyes were absent. No one was actually watching, but the perception of being seen was enough to alter action. The simulation activates even under false input. The idea that someone might see you is enough to shape you. So what are you really? Are you the version of yourself that exists when you're alone in your room, unfiltered, unobserved? Or are you the version that takes shape when someone's gaze arrives, even imagined, even virtual, even after they've left? Maybe you sitch both. Or maybe you steer mostly the latter. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's the system working exactly as designed. Simulation, after all, is not deception. It's prediction. Your brain simulates possibilities constantly, from motor actions to emotions to social consequences. It's how you navigate the world without freezing. But when the watcher arrives, your simulation becomes targeted, specific. You tailor your identity. And in that tailoring, you become coherent. Which begs the question, if no one ever looked at you again, how long until the simulation shuts down? How long until you forget how to be? You might assume you'd remain the same, untouched. But studies of extreme isolation say otherwise. Astronauts in long-duration missions, researchers in Antarctic bases, even prisoners in solitary, all report identity drift, a sense of fading. Their inner simulation loses traction. Without mirrors, both literal and social, their selfhood begins to feel theoretical. They forget how they laugh. They forget what expressions they wear when they're understood. They stop rehearsing for a world that no longer watches. And slowly, they begin to disappear from themselves. Now think about how simulation extends beyond the personal. Think of the digital age. We're watched constantly, not just by people but by algorithms, cameras, platforms. Every scroll, like, or pause is tracked. We know this, and because we know this, we curate our behavior. We optimize for visibility. We perform even in private. You post a photo not just to share, but to be seen, to simulate a version of you that is polished, approved, consistent. Even your private texts are written with a mental projection of the recipient in mind. Your identity online is a mosaic of simulations, some accurate, some aspirational, some algorithmic echoes of what gets the most attention. But the cost? Sometimes the simulation outlives the original. You forget what you liked before the feedback. You forget how you spoke before the audience. You become so skilled at being watched that you no longer know who's doing the watching inside your own head. And yet, there's something undeniably anchoring about it. When someone you care about sees you, truly sees you, and responds with recognition, your simulation sharpens, not in a performative way, but in a stabilizing way. You become real in their eyes. You sync with their attention. You feel once again that the edges of yourself are firm, felt, validated. They don't sit just observe your performance. They reinforce your pattern. And for a moment you remember what it's like to be you, without simulation. Because sometimes the simulation isn't artificial. It's the only thing keeping the real version of you from scattering. So is this bad? Are you just a reflection of others? Not quite. You're a convergence point. A self assembled through witnessing, a being stitched together by simulations that only run when attention is present. This doesn't make you fake. It makes you relational. It means your selfhood is a living, breathing thing, constantly updating, syncing, adapting, not inauthentic but responsive, dynamic, just like the universe itself. In quantum physics, A wave function describes all possible states of a particle. It exists in a cloud of potential until observed. Observation collapses the wave into a single state. Reality takes form. You too exist in a cloud of versions until attention lands on you. Then, you collapse into being. You simulate. You stabilize. You become. So the next time someone looks at you, remember they are not just watching. They are helping you exist. And the next time no one sits watching, try this. Look at yourself. Not just in a mirror, but inward. Simulate someone kind. Someone who sees the best version of you. Someone who's held your shape before. Let their gaze activate the version of you that remembers how to be whole. Because even a simulated gaze can keep you real. You think you sit alone. The door is locked. The curtain's drawn. Your phone is face down. No notifications. No footsteps in the hallway. You tell yourself, this is privacy. This is solitude. No one is watching now. But even here, even in silence, you perform. You still monitor your expression in the mirror. You still rehearse words in your head as if someone else might hear. You still choose what you say out loud, even when you're the only one listening. Why? Because privacy might be an illusion, not because people are always watching, but because you're always simulating that they could be. Privacy, as you define it, implies boundaries, a space untouched by other minds. But look closer. Even in your most isolated moments, traces of others live inside you. Their expectations, their voices, their memories, their gaze. The way your mother would frown if she saw your room. The way your boss would read your draft. The way your partner would react to your silence. They are not here, but they are present. The philosopher Michel Foucault explored this in his concept of the panopticon, a prison design, where inmates never know when they're being watched. The tower at the center may be empty, but the possibility of surveillance is enough to enforce behavior. Over time, the watcher becomes internalized. You don't need the guard anymore. You watch yourself. And in modern life, this internal surveillance doesn't just linger, it thrives. Your digital habits are catalogued. Your online searches are profiled. Your location pings without your consent. Even in spaces that feel private, you know, somewhere, a machine is watching, or might be. You don't have proof. You don't need proof. The possibility changes you. But this idea goes beyond technology. It touches something ancient. Humans are social beings. For most of our history, we survived in groups. Being watched meant safety. Being forgotten meant danger. So evolution built us to be watchable, to signal emotions, to interpret faces, to maintain reputations. Privacy, in the way we think of it now, full isolation, was rare, unnatural, even. Which means this modern fantasy of complete privacy might be psychologically impossible. Because even in the absence of others, you still carry the imprint of being seen. You move like someone might be watching. You talk to yourself like someone might be listening. You think in sentences that someone else could read. This doesn't mean you're paranoid. It means you're human. Your mind contains a gallery of remembered faces. People who once witnessed you, judged you, loved you, shaped you, and in quiet moments, those faces resurface. They remind you who you've been, who you're trying to be. Sometimes they accuse, sometimes they reassure. But they sit are always there, even in so-called privacy. So what is privacy really? Maybe it sits not the absence of others. Maybe it sits the presence of only yourself. But that too raises questions. Because who are you when no one else is included? When no version of you is being reflected? When no simulation is being run? Do you feel real in that state? Do your thoughts still have weight, if you know no one will ever hear them? Do your feelings still matter if they leave no imprint? Many people report that their most private experiences, the ones they never share, are also the ones that feel most unreal. A dream you didn't tell anyone, a thought you never wrote down, a moment you never captured. Over time, these things begin to fade, not just from memory, but from meaning. Because meaning is often made in reflection. When you share something, even with a future version of yourself, it gains form, it becomes part of your timeline, a node in the structure of your identity. Without that loop, the moment dissolves, like mist that never touches the ground. This is why some people feel invisible, even when they're surrounded by comfort. They have space, they have silence, they have freedom, but no one is witnessing them. No one is echoing them. No one is confirming that this inner world actually exists. and so privacy becomes loneliness. But let's not throw it away just yet. Because there's another kind of privacy, a sacred one, a kind where you're alone, not to escape the gaze, but to meet yourself without it. This kind of privacy is rare, difficult. It requires courage, because when no one else is watching, you become the witness. You become the only one who can reflect yourself. And that can be terrifying, but also profoundly freeing. In that space, you are not performing. You are not optimizing for approval. You are not anticipating response. You are simply existing, without a mask, without a script, without the algorithm of social acceptance running in the background. This is not easy. Most people avoid this level of privacy by filling it with noise, with screens, with tasks, with memories of others. We fear that if we go too deep into aloneness, we'll lose definition. We'll forget how to return. But sometimes, it's in this solitude that the most honest version of you emerges. Not the version someone wants. Not the version someone once sculpted. But the version that simply is. So maybe privacy isn't instead about hiding. Maybe it sips about arriving. Arriving in a space where you can hear your own thoughts without interference. Where you can feel emotions without explaining them. Where you can exist without being translated for someone else's understanding. In this light, privacy becomes a mirror without distortion. Not because no one is watching, but because you are the only one who is, and you are watching without expectation. This kind of privacy doesn't isolate you. It stabilizes you. It reminds you that your existence is not a performance, that you have shape even in darkness, that you are real even when silent. So next time you sit in that quiet room, phone down, doors closed, no one listening, don't try to escape the silence. Step into it. See what shape you still carry. And remember, even when the world isn't set watching, you are still here. You reach for the glass of water. You don't think about how your fingers bend, or how the cold touches your skin. You just reach. But something more subtle happens underneath the motion. Something you rarely notice. You exist as the one doing it. But what does that mean? To exist as something implies you are not only present, but also perceived, by the world, by others, and sometimes by yourself. Presence, in its rawest form, is not just being somewhere, it's being recognized as being somewhere. And in most moments of life, your sense of existence flows through perception. You are seen, so you feel here. You are heard, so you feel real. You are touched, so you feel grounded. But imagine removing all perception, no mirrors, no glances, no voices, no shadows, no reflections. Would you still be here in the same way? Would you still feel like a self? Think of a newborn. They cry and flail until someone touches them, looks at them, mirrors back their presence. Through that reflection, they start to form identity, not through language or memory, but through pure perception. Someone sees me, I must be. This dependency never fully goes away. Your presence, even now, feels most alive when it's registered. At a party, someone laughs at your joke. On a call, someone nods. In the street, someone meets your eyes. These flickers of acknowledgement activate something deep, a neurological and emotional stamp that whispers, I am here. But what happens when perception is withdrawn? When you speak and no one answers? When your message is left unread? When your movement isn't noticed? Your body may be there, your mind active, your senses alert, but your presence begins to blur, like a ghost pacing between rooms. This is why the pain of being ignored cuts deeper than simple disagreement. To be argued with is still to be perceived, but to be ignored is to be made invisible. It starves the part of you that needs reflection to exist. Presence becomes a two-way contract. I show up, and the world notices. And when the world stops noticing, you start questioning the showing up. Now, shift perspective. Think about someone close to you. Picture them entering a room. You notice subtle things, the way they breathe, their posture, their energy. Even if they say nothing, their presence is felt, and you're perceiving it in layers: physical form, emotional state, mental availability. This act of perception isn't passive, it's active. You're tuning into them, registering them, echoing them back into reality. And in doing so, you're affirming, yes, you are here. You give them presence. So what about yourself? Who gives you that kind of presence? Do you need others to confirm you? Or can you learn to perceive yourself without a mirror. This is where it gets complicated. Because self-perception is not the same as external perception. When you perceive yourself, you often filter through judgment, memory, identity, and expectation. You don't just see, you evaluate. You wonder, am I doing this right? Do I look okay? Would they approve? And ironically, even in private self-perception, you often simulate someone else's gaze. You see yourself through your father's eyes. You hear your voice in your teacher's tone. You walk with the rhythm your culture assigned. You fold yourself into recognizable presence by mimicking external perception. Which brings us to a strange paradox. You may never be fully present as yourself unless you escape the simulations. But can you? Is presence possible without perception? Philosophers like Husserl and Merleau-Ponty argued that perception isn't just how we experience the world, it's how we experience being in the world. Your body, as you know it, is not an object among objects. It's the center of perception, you perceive from it. And you perceive yourself through the way your body moves, reacts and senses. So yes, there's a path to presence that doesn't rely on being seen by others, but it still relies on perception, your own. That glass of water you reached for, it told your mind, I exist, because I moved, and I felt the cold. Not because someone saw you drink, but because you perceived the experience happening to yourself. Still, this raises an unsettling question. If perception is what sustains your presence, then what happens during sleep? What about anesthesia? What about dissociation? In those states your body continues, but your sense of being vanishes. Does that mean you weren't present? Some argue yes. That presence is bound to consciousness. Others say no. That presence is deeper than awareness, and the self continues even when you're not watching. But you'll never know, because without perception there is no anchor. The moment slips from your memory, and with it, your presence in that moment erodes. This is why people sometimes record themselves, not for narcissism, but for proof. I was here. I did this. It happened. Perception as preservation. And perhaps in the digital age we chase this perception more than ever. Photos, stories, likes, comments, scene receipts, all of it saying you were here, you mattered, you existed. But perception is instead always affirmation. Sometimes it becomes performance. You start curating your presence instead of feeling it. You pose instead of being, you react instead of reflecting. The gaze of others begins to shape not just your actions, but your sense of self. And suddenly you're present only as the version that's being watched, not the one who lives within. So how do you return? How do you reclaim perception without performing? You begin by noticing your own presence. Right now. Not as an idea, but as an experience. Feel the air on your skin. Hear the sound around you. Notice the pressure of your body where you sit. This is perception, not of others, not of their gaze, but of yourself as alive. You are not just a character in someone else's narrative. You are the one breathing now. You are perceiving the world. And through that, you are here. Not because you are seen, but because you see, and that might be enough. You notice it every time someone looks at you just a second too long. The straightening of your posture, the shift in your voice, the sudden awareness of your hands, the way your face tightens into a more socially acceptable shape. You weren't set pretending before, but now you sit being watched. And with that simple act, you become different. This transformation is ancient. Evolution wired you to adapt in the presence of eyes. A predator's gaze meant danger. A tribe member's look meant belonging or rejection. Being seen was never neutral. It was survival. But in the modern world, this primal reflex has bloomed into something more psychological, more existential. You don't just adapt behavior, you begin to shape identity based on what others reflect back. You become the version of you that is being witnessed. If someone sees you as funny, you become funnier. If someone expects you to fail, you start stumbling. If someone watches you with admiration, you hold yourself higher, straighter, more deserving. In the theater of life, you are cast again and again in roles you didn't audition for, and the script is written by the audience's gaze. But what happens when you play a role long enough? What if the act stops being an act? It starts with the voice you use when talking to your parents, then a different one for your friends, a more careful one for authority, a louder one for strangers, a softer one when you're tired. And slowly, you begin to collect these versions. Each version is shaped by the expectation in the eyes of others. And eventually, the original you, the unscripted you, becomes hard to locate. Or maybe it never existed outside this mirror hall of reflection. Consider the looking glass self, a concept developed by sociologist Charles Cooley. He proposed that you form your self-concept based on how you believe others see you. Not how they actually see you, but how you think they do. So when you feel judged, you internalize that judgment. When you feel invisible, you shrink. When you feel admired, you thrive. All based on projected perception. You don't just become what's seen, you become what you imagine is being seen. And that sits where the distortion begins. Because the gaze you react to isn't set always real. Sometimes, it's a ghost of someone long gone. A parent's disapproval echoing in silence. A childhood friend's betrayal lingering in your laugh. An ex-lover's look still shaping the way you dress. You continue performing for audiences that aren't even in the room anymore. And the performance becomes permanent. Now ask yourself, if no one was watching you, who would you be? Would you still move the same? Would you speak your truth more often? Would you still make the same choices, wear the same clothes, hold the same values? Or would something else emerge? Something quieter, something raw? That question haunts many people who reach solitude, not by choice, but by accident. When the audience disappears, through loss, separation, silence, the performer remains on stage with no lines, no cue, and no applause. And suddenly, you're left with the terrifying task of being unseen. But maybe that's where the truest self begins to speak. Because without a gaze to shape you, without a mirror to correct you, without applause to seduce you, you might finally listen inward. Not to the voice that was built by others, but to the one that watched them build you. The observer behind the performance. The part of you that was watching you all along. And yet, there sits danger there too. If the only way you've ever known yourself is through reflection, the absence of that mirror can feel like death, a social and spiritual vanishing. This is why people fear isolation so deeply. It starts not the lack of conversation. It's the disintegration of identity in the absence of recognition. Because identity isn't just internal, it's relational. You know you're kind because others felt your warmth. You know you're intelligent because others valued your insight. You know you stir funny because they laughed. So who are you in the quiet? Are you kind in a room with no one to receive it? Are you smart in the dark with no one to understand? Are you funny in silence? Do you still exist when the gaze is gone? Maybe this is why the camera, the digital gaze, has become so important to modern life. It offers an illusion of being watched, even when alone. You vlog your thoughts, you document your day, you curate your meals, your workouts, your hobbies, all in case someone sees. And when someone does, it confirms the performance. It stabilizes the character. But when they don't set, you start questioning, did I do it for nothing? Was I real in that moment? Or was I just hoping to be? Yet in these layers, there's also a way out. A realization. You are not just what is seen. You are not only the performer. You are also the witness of yourself. You are the one who notices your reaction when someone compliments you. You are the one who hears the voice tremble before it breaks. You are the one who feels the mask tighten and slip. This inner observer, the quiet presence behind your roles, is always there, unseen, yet seeing, and maybe that sips the truest you of all, because it doesn't vanish with applause or rejection. It doesn't state shift when someone walks in. It watches you become what's seen, and it remembers who you were before. So tonight, as the light dims, and you feel the urge to shape yourself for another sip's gaze, pause. Feel your presence. Let the mask drop, not in rebellion, but in recognition. Not as a performance, but as a return. Because before you became what others saw, you were already here. And you still are. You walk into a room and no one looks up. You say something, and no one responds. You leave, and no one notices. It's not just silence. It's something deeper, something eerier. It sips as if you weren't sipped there at all. But existentially, there's a part of you that starts to question, am I fading? Not emotionally, not metaphorically. Because the truth is, you're built to respond to observation, to gaze, to reflection. And without it, something begins to dim. Science might frame this idea as social validation, or interpersonal feedback loops. But underneath all the terminology, there's a simpler mechanism at play. You come alive through recognition. Not applause, not praise, not even approval. The subtle nod that you are in fact real, just acknowledgement that someone else sees your edges. But in the absence of that gaze, something strange happens. You begin to blur. Ask anyone who's felt invisible. The elderly in forgotten care homes, the introverted child in loud classrooms, the employee whose ideas are always spoken over. They said tell you it sits not just lonely, it sits disorienting. Because you start to wonder, do my gestures mean anything if no one sees them? Does my presence affect the world at all? Are my thoughts valid if no one hears them? And when the answer feels like no, you begin to fade. You still breathe, still move, still function. But the sharpness of your existence begins to dull, like a photograph losing contrast, like a memory losing meaning. Psychologists call this the invisible self. It's when a person's identity becomes unstable due to prolonged periods of being unacknowledged, not abused, not attacked, just unnoticed. And that's perhaps the most brutal erosion of all, because if someone opposes you, at least they see you. But indifference, that sips erasure. You might remember the hide-a-simile experiment, a short animation where simple shapes move around a screen. Most viewers instantly create stories about the shapes. This triangle is chasing that circle. That square is hiding. That dot is scared. The key insight is this: we project intention and identity onto things we observe. Now flip the script. What happens when you are the one unobserved? When no one assigns you a role in their mental play? When no one projects intention onto you? You become background. When your motion stirs no narrative. A shape without purpose. A person without placement. You don't just feel disconnected. You feel non-existent. And this extends beyond the personal. In society, marginalized groups often report this same fading, not just through oppression, but through omission. A voice unheard. A face uncaptured. A story unrecorded. When history forgets you, it's not just the past that erases you, it's your place in the present that starts to fracture. We anchor ourselves in being seen, in being counted, in mattering. Without it, identity doesn't just weaken, it disperses. But maybe the most intimate space where this fading occurs is inside the mind. Because even internally, your existence often relies on an imagined witness. You talk to yourself in the form of dialogue. You justify actions as if explaining them. You perform habits as if someone is quietly watching. And when you strip even that away, when your internal mirror stops reflecting, something vanishes. Not your body, not your memory, but your selfhood. This is why deep depression, isolation, and trauma often include dissociation. A sense of not being real, of floating outside yourself, of losing the sense of being someone, not even yourself. Because when no one sees you, what if this fading isn't a flaw? You stop seeing yourself as real. But here sips the twist. What if it's a doorway? A passage to something more profound? Because when you fade from others' eyes, when you're no longer forced to perform for perception, you may stumble into a state that's terrifying and pure. No lights. A blank stage. No script. And in that silence, you might hear something small. Something soft. Just silence. Because it sees you. Something that doesn't need to be seen. Your awareness. Not your thoughts. Not your roles. Not your memories. Not I am this, or I am that. Just the still, stable sense that I am. Just I am. That sips what mystics and meditators speak of. This raw, unadorned being. Unperforming. Unvalidated. You don't fade from the world to disappear. Unseen, and yet undeniable. So maybe the fading is not death. Maybe it sips a returning. You fade to discover the part of you that never needed to be seen to exist. To the self that is not constructed. Not maintained by mirrors. Not threatened by silence. The self that simply watches. So tonight, if you feel invisible and endures, if the world doesn't notice you, if no one responds, likes, comments, or calls, let that be a space, not for despair, but for arrival, because there, in the quiet absence of being seen, you might finally feel what it seems like to exist on your own terms, unwitnessed, unfading, unmeasured, solitude. The word itself carries a hushed weight, a silence not of absence but of presence, your own and no one else's. You might picture a cabin deep in the forest, a closed room, a mountain path where the only footsteps are your own, or maybe it's more mundane, a night alone at home, a morning where the phone doesn't buzz, a long walk with no destination and no acknowledgement. And at first it feels like peace. The world softens. The background noise dims. You're left with the raw material of your existence, your breath, your body, your thoughts. But then, something strange begins to echo. You pass a mirror, and for a second, it feels like someone else's face stares back. You say something aloud, and the words fall flat, like stones dropped into an empty well. You realize, there accepts no witness here. And that realization doesn't liberate you. It isolates you. Because solitude isn't just about being alone. It's about being unobserved, and for a self that was built in part by the eyes of others, solitude starts to feel like a kind of disappearance. You become the ghost in your own story. What are you without reactions? Without feedback? Without anyone to bounce against? For most of your life, your sense of self was carved out by observation. You saw your reflection in your parents' praise, your teacher's corrections, your friend's laughter, your lover's gaze. Each one handed you a little mirror, and slowly you assembled those fragments into an identity. But when you're truly alone, no mirrors, no feedback, no gaze, the pieces loosen, the glue weakens, and the questions rise. Who am I without anyone else? The brain, too, rebels against prolonged solitude. Studies on sensory deprivation and isolation show that humans begin to experience hallucinations, paranoia, time distortion. Why? Because the mind craves input, not just any input, social input, observation, interaction. We aren't just social creatures. We are observed creatures. Observation is part of how we stabilize. In solitude, that stabilizing force is gone. Your posture changes when no one sees you. You might slouch, shuffle, stop performing the small graces of social expectation. You eat differently, walk differently, even breathe differently. Not because you're pretending when you're watched, but because part of you relies on being watched to remember how to be. That sips the paradox. Solitude is often sought as a path to authenticity, to find yourself without interference. But what you often find is not a core truth waiting underneath, but layers peeling away, with nothing solid beneath. You realize how many of your thoughts exist as imagined conversations, how much of your self-image is sculpted by the expressions of others, how much of your daily structure comes from the invisible rhythm of being perceived. And when all of that is gone, you begin to drift. This is why exile, solitary confinement, and social ostracization are considered some of the most severe psychological punishments. It's not the lack of company that breaks people, it's the lack of witnessing. The self untethered from observation doesn't collapse, it evaporates. You might feel this evaporation on long, lonely nights. Not depression, not sadness, just a sense that you are less sharp, less defined. A fog instead of a form. Some try to fill the void with artificial observation, scrolling social media, recording themselves, talking aloud to no one, because anything, even a digital echo, is better than vanishing. Others lean into the vanishing. They meditate, they fast, they walk alone for days, and some of them report a strange transcendent shift. They say the self begins to disappear, not in terror, but in peace. Because underneath the need to be seen is the possibility of not needing it at all. You begin to feel what spiritual traditions have described for centuries, that the self constructed by observation is not the only self. There is another layer beneath, silent, vast, untouched by gaze. In solitude, you meet it. It doesn't perform, it doesn't react, it doesn't narrate. It just is. This deep self doesn't need identity. It doesn't need language. It doesn't even need thought. It exists as a presence, a field of awareness behind the fading mask of personality. And in the quiet of solitude, once the performative self dissolves, you feel it. At first, it sits eerie. Then, it sits grounding. Because you realize the self that needed to be seen was always shifting. But this deeper self, This invisible awareness doesn't require validation. It's unfading. So maybe solitude is instead a prison. Maybe it sips an invitation. Not to vanish, but to return. To reassemble yourself not from the fragments of others' perception, but from your own stillness. To be your own witness. To discover that you don't need a mirror to exist, because you are the one holding the mirror. You can begin to witness yourself, to watch without judgment, to see your own thoughts drift by like clouds, to breathe without performance, to be present without audience. And when you emerge again, when you return to the world of eyes and voices, you do so differently. You don't crave observation the way you once did. You don't disappear in its absence. Because you seen what lies beneath it all. And it didn't vanish. It waited. It watched. It remained. That is the gift of solitude. Not disappearance, but discovery. A rediscovery of the self that doesn't flicker when no one's watching. A reminder that invisibility isn't always loss. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something truer. There's a strange power in hearing your name spoken out loud. Not in a crowd, not on a form, but in conversation. Intentionally, deliberately. It's a sound that grabs your attention like no other. Why? Because recognition animates you. From the moment you stir born, long before you understand language, you begin scanning the world for acknowledgement. A parent sip's face, a gaze that holds yours, a voice that rises when you cry. It sips not just about safety or food, it sips about something deeper. Being known. To be recognized is to be affirmed. It's a signal that you're not just occupying space, you're being registered in someone else's awareness. It's not just that you exist, it's that someone else knows you exist. And in that knowing, a strange kind of life begins. Your sense of identity doesn't fully bloom in solitude. It unfolds in relation. That's why recognition feels electric. When someone looks at you and sees you, not just a body or a role or a passerby, you light up. It doesn't have to be romantic or even affectionate. It just has to be intentional. You feel animated, activated. In a strange way, part of you only becomes real when another person's mind mirrors it back. And that's where the paradox begins. If others' recognition helps animate who you are, then who are you when they're not there? You might think, I'm still me, whether they see it or not. But here's the twist. Many parts of your personality, preferences, even behavior only emerge in the presence of others. There are entire sides of you that lie dormant until the right person looks your way. Think about how differently you act around various people. You're one version of yourself with a close friend, another with a parent, another with a stranger. Each recognition draws out a different you. So which version is real? Maybe all of them. Maybe none of them. Or maybe the real self is the one that responds, that shapeshifts and adapts and unfolds in different ways depending on the eyes watching. Recognition, then, doesn't just animate you, it sculpts you. You've likely felt this in subtle ways. A compliment that made you rethink your appearance. A harsh word that made you second-guess your tone. A look of admiration that made you stand taller. But it goes deeper. Have you ever changed a decision because you imagined how someone else would react? Not because they were there, but because their gaze lived in your mind. That sips the ghost of recognition. Even in solitude, we carry internal witnesses, parents, partners, peers, watching silently from the corners of our consciousness. Their imagined responses shape our real choices. Recognition, once given, doesn't fade. It embeds itself. Psychologists refer to this as the generalized other, the internalized audience that oversees and guides our behavior. It's not always oppressive. Sometimes it's grounding. It gives structure, purpose, accountability. But it also means this: your very sense of self is collaborative. You are not a solitary invention. You are a co-authored identity, which is beautiful and terrifying. It means we need each other in ways far deeper than we admit, not just for companionship or cooperation, but for existence, for confirmation that we are here and visible. This is why being ignored can hurt more than being criticized, why being forgotten stings more than being disliked, because when recognition disappears, a part of you goes with it. You become invisible, and worse, you become unreal. This fear fuels much of our modern world. It drives our need to post, to share, to announce. It's not always vanity. Sometimes it's a quiet cry. Do you see me? Do I still exist in your mind? We chase likes not for numbers but for acknowledgement. Because even fleeting recognition feels like life. But what happens when we no longer need it? What happens if we learn to animate ourselves? It's possible. It starts with noticing how often you look outward to define yourself, how often you wait for approval before you believe in your own worth, how often your actions are delayed by the absence of validation. Then, stop. Speak even if no one is listening, write even if no one is reading, dress for yourself, move for yourself, recognize yourself. At first, it feels hollow, performative, like acting without an audience. But slowly something shifts. You begin to animate from within. You realize you can be the mirror, the observer, the voice of affirmation, the witness of your own presence. And in doing so, you reclaim the power that was always yours, but had been outsourced to others. You're no longer a puppet pulled by gaze. You're the puppeteer and the puppet both. And this internal recognition doesn't mean you stop needing others. It just means their acknowledgement becomes a gift, not a requirement. You can still be moved by a smile, still grow from feedback, still enjoy being seen, but you are no longer dependent on it. You exist whether or not they notice. Because you have learned to see yourself. Recognition still animates you, but now, it flows both ways. You see them. They see you. But even when no one sits looking, you remain. Breathing. Thinking. Being. Lit not by the spotlight of others, but by the quiet flame of self-awareness. And in that light, you come alive, not as a performance, not as a reflection, but as your own origin. But there's something even more powerful than a window. A camera. You're walking down the street. You pass a shop window. Without thinking, you glance at your reflection. It's not vanity, it's instinct. You need confirmation that you're still there, that you still look like you, that you're still being witnessed, even if it's by glass. When you see a camera pointed at you, even if no one's behind it, you change. Your posture straightens. Your face arranges itself. Your behavior shifts. You adjust your reality to fit what the lens might capture. Not just seen. Not just glanced at, but archived, preserved, turned into proof. A camera doesn't blink. It doesn't forget. It doesn't look away, and that permanence is what makes it feel divine. Because in that moment, you stir being recorded. If it sits on film, you existed. Because if it's some film, it happened. In some part of you when a camera is present, you become more real, more solid, more undeniable. What happens to your sense of self in the absence of documentation? In the moments that pass without a camera, without a screen, without a post, do they feel thinner? Do they slip away faster? And that sits where the paradox begins. Think of a memory that no one else witnessed. Maybe a private moment, a walk at night, a thought you had in silence. Can you fully trust it? Or does some part of you wish you had captured it, so that it wouldn't be lost? You are not alone in that feeling. Because deep down, many of us believe. We live in a culture obsessed with documentation. Pictures, videos, stories, timestamps. It's not just about sharing, it's about securing presence, about turning fleeting experiences into evidence. If I didn't record it, did it really happen? This is the camera sit spell. It doesn't just reflect reality, it defines it. It declares, this is real, this existed, this person was here. And so, we perform, for the lens, for the feed, for the invisible eyes, we imagine watching, now or later. We start to live with the awareness of being watched, even when no one's around. We internalize the camera, and that changes everything. It affects how we cry, how we laugh, how we express love, how we endure pain. Because in the back of our minds, a phantom lens is always rolling, waiting, framing. We begin curating our lives, not to experience them, but to prove them. This is what philosophers call the panopticon effect, a design where you never know if you're being observed, so you behave as if you always are. It's self-surveillance. It's a prison of our own reflection. And yet, it's comforting. Because when you're being watched, even by a machine, you're not alone. You're still validated. You're still witnessed. This is why some people speak to their phone cameras like they're confiding in a friend. Why vlogs feel more intimate than conversations. Why a person might cry to the lens, rather than to a human being. And here, sips where it becomes existential. Because the camera isn't just a recorder. It's become a proxy for presence. If your most honest moments happen because a camera is watching, are you acting for yourself or for the viewer? If you feel more real when you're filmed, then what is your unrecorded self? Are you still you when there sips no record? Is your identity portable, or is it pixelated? There sips a deeper question hiding in this. What happens when you watch yourself? You scroll through old photos, you see a video from 3 years ago, you hear your voice on a recording, and suddenly, you stir outside of yourself. You become both the subject and the audience. And the result? A part of you says, that sips me. You feel split. Another part whispers, that sips not me anymore. Because the camera didn't just capture you, it froze you. And now you're looking at a ghost of yourself, a preserved self, a version that can't explain what it was feeling. You begin to question your own continuity. Am I the same person? Or am I just the next scene in an endless documentary that I didn't know I was filming? And if a camera stops recording you, do you fade? Here sips the unsettling part. Do you slip into the void of untracked moments? Sometimes the camera feels more real than your memories. You still let the lens tell your story. You outsourced your narrative. You forget what you felt, but you remember how it looked. The video becomes your memory. The selfie becomes your timeline. The footage becomes your truth. But is that really you? Maybe. Or maybe it's a version of you filtered through angles, lighting, and awareness. So what do? You reclaim your presence. You allow moments to be messy, to be unfiltered, to be ephemeral. You step away from the lens, not forever, just long enough to feel yourself in your body, not in the playback. You let experiences exist without evidence. You start to feel real again, even when no one is watching. And in doing so, you start to rebuild trust in your own perception, in your own presence. You realize that the most profound moments often can't be captured, that not everything needs a lens to be real, that some of your most alive moments will live only in your chest, not in your camera roll. You begin to believe that your existence isn't tied to pixels but to presence. That being unseen doesn't make you unreal. Because you are not a product of footage. You are not a highlight reel. That disappearing from the frame doesn't mean disappearing from the world. The silence between frames. You are the space between scenes. The reality behind the lens. Does the tree still fall in the forest if no ear records the sound? Does the leaf still tremble in the wind if no eye watches its dance? Every morning, the light shifts just slightly across your room. The shadows crawl over the floor in near silence, marking the passage of time like invisible notches on a wall. The world is moving, but here's the question. Is it moving if no one sees it? Maybe you've heard these before. Philosophers have chewed them to the bone, but you're not just hearing the questions, you're living them. Because if you are not witnessed, do you exist? The longer you stare into this idea, the more the ground beneath your selfhood begins to slide. Suddenly, the line between existence and observation blurs. It's not just about you being watched. It's that the world itself might only become real when it's perceived. The theory isn't new. It's baked into quantum physics. At the subatomic level, particles behave differently when they're observed. They collapse from clouds of probability into a single reality, because something watched. Wrap your head around that. The act of seeing makes something real. So what if the same thing is true for you? What if your identity, your personality, your sense of being, what if these are all cloud-like until someone looks at you, speaks your name, remembers your presence? And the world? It might be the same. You're not just a person. You are a phenomenon in need of witnessing to exist in form. Every object, every room, every forgotten alley you pass by. What if it only unfolds into reality the moment your gaze touches it? What if the world isn't just a stage but a responsive one, lighting up only when an audience is present? That sips the terrifying beauty of this idea. Because it means the world is made of relationships, not objects. It's not things that exist on their own. It's the act of witnessing that animates them. When you're around someone who listens, you feel more vivid. When someone remembers your name, you feel anchored. When you speak and someone nods, you feel real. And you? You're not a fixed character in a script. You're an ongoing response to being seen. But in silence, in isolation, you can feel yourself fade. You're still here, but the world grows flat. Sound dulls, colors pale. You don't vanish entirely, but you lose your edges. And that sits where the fear creeps in. Because if the world isn't set watching, if no one is listening, if the mirror has been covered, and the screen is turned off, what sits left of you? This is more than a philosophical riddle. It stips a real emotional landscape, one you wandered through during lonely nights, unshared triumphs, or unspoken heartbreaks. The moments where no one knew what you were going through, where you wondered, does this matter if no one else sees it? You might not even tell anyone about those moments later. And in that silence, they vanish. They become unreal in the timeline of your life. Here sips something stranger still. We often think of ourselves as separate from others, like independent islands, but that's an illusion. You exist through the witnessing of others. When someone laughs at your joke, your sense of humor is born. When someone flinches at your anger, your power is confirmed. Even solitude, when chosen, is defined by the memory of togetherness. We call it solitude only because we know what it means to be seen. When someone holds you during grief, your pain is shaped into something that can be held. Without a witness, your traits float. They're ideas. With a witness, they become real. In some ancient cultures, people believed names had no meaning until they were spoken aloud, that the act of naming was an act of creation. You weren't just identifying something, you were calling it into existence. Maybe we still live that way. Maybe when someone says your name, they're not just addressing you. They stir activating you. They stir declaring to the world, this one exists. So what does that mean for you now, in this quiet moment, watching this screen? You are being witnessed by the page, by the voice in your head that reads these words, by your own awareness of yourself reading. And in this witnessing, you exist. But if you closed your eyes, if the words vanished, if the thoughts stilled, would you still be there? That sips the paradox. Because the witness isn't sit just outside of you. It might also be inside. There's a part of you always watching, always recording, always narrating. The you who listens when you talk to yourself. The you who sees your thoughts like a movie screen. The you who observes your own emotions and silently takes notes. That inner witness, some call it the soul, some call it consciousness, some call it awareness. It might be the deepest layer of your existence. And maybe that's what keeps you real when the world isn't watching. But here's the twist. Even that inner witness was shaped by outer ones. Your first mirror was your mother Sip's eyes. Your first voice came from someone else's voice calling your name. Your sense of self grew like a vine against the trellis of other people's attention. So even your private self is rooted in public recognition. You are the world Sip's memory of you. And the world, it sips your memory of it. That's why people return to childhood homes. Why we visit graves. Why we take photos of sunsets. Because we're all trying to witness something, so it doesn't disappear. So it doesn't fall back into the void of the unwatched. Everyone is walking around hoping to be seen, not just with eyes, but with heart, to be remembered, to be understood, to be real in someone else's world. You are not alone in this. So maybe the question isn't set just who sees me. It stips also, who do I see into being? Because you start not just the witnessed, you are also the witness. And when you look at someone fully, patiently, curiously, you're giving them reality, you're anchoring them in the world. You stir saying, I see you. And with those 3 words, you become part of the world that keeps them from fading. Have you ever noticed how much of your identity is tied to being seen? You walk into a room, and suddenly, everything shifts. The hum of conversation quiets, just slightly. Someone turns, their eyes meet yours. In that instant, you feel something snap into place, an invisible click, like a key turning in a lock you didn't know existed. And suddenly, you're not just a moving body anymore. You're a person. You're someone, because someone is looking at you. You might spend hours in solitude, floating in your own mind, blurry at the edges. But the moment someone looks directly at you, especially someone who knows your name, you solidify. You stop being a wandering thought and become a fact, a presence, a definition. That gaze doesn't just notice you, it gives shape to who you are in that moment. You could be smiling or tired, curious or closed off, confident or small, and their eyes lock that state into memory, into reality. It's like you were a shifting mist until that glance held you still. It's strange, isn't it? How fragile your sense of self can be, how dependent it is on the interplay between your inner experience and external confirmation. Without a mirror, can you trust your expression? Without a voice echoed back in conversation, do your thoughts feel real? This isn't just poetic reflection, it's supported by psychology. There's a concept called the looking glass self. Coined by sociologist Charles Horton Cooley, it suggests that your self-image forms largely based on how you think others perceive you. You see yourself through their eyes. Not just what you look like, but whether you matter, whether you belong, whether you're worthy of love, or attention, or space. In a sense, their gaze becomes your mirror. But mirrors don't always reflect truth. Sometimes they distort, sometimes they break, and sometimes, when no one's watching, they disappear. And when the mirrors are gone, what's left of you? Who are you when no one is looking? Maybe you've had those days where you feel invisible, walking through crowds, going to work, sitting in class, no one meeting your gaze, no one calling your name. You begin to doubt your outline. Your voice grows quieter in your own ears. You shrink. Other days, someone locks eyes with you across a room, and suddenly you're there, not just physically, but psychologically anchored. It doesn't even take a long stare, just a few seconds of connection, a shared moment of being noticed. Their eyes say, "I see you." And in return you say, "I sit am real." What's remarkable is how unconscious this entire process is. We rarely think about how important eye contact is to our sense of identity, but even infants seek it out. A newborn, only days old, will instinctively turn toward the human face, especially the eyes. It's our first form of communication, before language, before thought. Eyes meant safety, recognition, connection, existence. Even in dreams, we often know when someone is looking at us, even when we can't see them. That feeling of being watched penetrates deeper than logic. It roots itself in instinct, in evolution. Because to be watched was to be known. To be known was to survive. To be unseen was to be forgotten. And so our biology evolved to crave the gaze, to build identity from its warmth, or shatter beneath its absence. Looking someone in the eye during a first meeting. Think of how many rituals in your life center around the eyes. Locking eyes during a confession of love, or truth. We know that something powerful lives in the eyes, that they hold a silent language, that they contain the script to a self we are constantly rehearsing, re-editing, or erasing. Avoiding eye contact during shame, guilt, or fear. You define them by how you see them. You fix them in place with your gaze. And, here sips the twist. You do this to others too. You may not mean to, but your eyes write stories on their faces. You decide without words who they are allowed to be. Strong, weak, funny, worthy, unworthy. That sips why kindness matters. And the cruel part. People often become the story you write with your eyes. And you are not just a receiver, you are a creator too. You are not just seen, you are created in the seeing. Because when you look at someone with gentleness, you give them a chance to see themselves that way too. But what happens when your gaze is replaced by a camera? What happens when screens watch, instead of faces? We live in a world of surveillance, of constant observation. You might think, well, I stop always being seen now. My phone, the street cameras, the algorithms, all eyes. Because those things don't see you. They scan, they record, they recognize patterns, but they don't give you identity. They don't lock eyes with the soul of who you are and say, I see this version of you right now in this moment, and I understand it. But are you really? Only humans can do that. And that's why real eye contact is still sacred. It's why even a fleeting glance from a stranger can change the course of your day or your life. Because for just a second, they became a mirror. They reflected you back to yourself. So what does this mean for you tonight? And in that mirror you might have seen someone braver than you felt, or someone more fragile, or more curious, or more alive. Maybe nothing. Or maybe tomorrow, you'll look up just a second longer. You'll meet someone's eyes and hold the connection instead of looking away. You'll feel that invisible thread tug your presence into focus. Maybe you'll forget this. The moment the screen goes dark, and you still remember. You are not just made of memories or thoughts or stories. You are made of light that reflects in the eyes of others. And when they look at you, they lock you into being. And when you look at them, you return the favor. In that silent moment, identity isn't something you find. It's something you share. You were never just born into yourself. You were looked into, created by the glances you absorbed, the stares you returned, the eyes that rested on you like brushes on a canvas. The first time your mother saw your face, something shifted in both of you, a silent contract of recognition. You weren't simply present, you were seen, and in that moment, you were made. This isn't sect, just metaphor. It's biology, it's psychology, it's philosophy, and somehow it's also magic. And they looked. From infancy, your brain is wired to build its sense of self through eye contact. That's how you learned trust, how you learned emotion, how you learned that you exists at all. You cried, and someone looked. Their gaze confirmed your signal. Their eyes told you, yes, I know you sips are here. You didn't just cry into the void, you cried into someone. That look became the beginning of your identity. What if no one looked? But what if that never happened? Studies of neglected infants, those raised without consistent eye contact, show something tragic. Development slows. Emotional regulation falters. The world becomes a terrifying blur. Without a reliable gaze from another, the infant doesn't fully learn where they end and the world begins. Fast forward to adulthood, and the principle still holds, just more subtly. In other words, without the look, they aren't fully made. When you're among strangers, unnoticed, the world feels loose around the edges. Your outline is foggy, but when someone sees you, really sees you, a strange thing happens. Your presence tightens. You stand straighter. You become aware of your voice, your posture, yourself, because the look is sculpting you again. You might think this is uncomfortable. Maybe it even feels performative. But here sips the twist. You need it. Because every version of you, the confident one, the uncertain one, the thoughtful one, only fully manifests when it's called forth by the right gaze. The look that admires you may create a bolder version of you. The look that questions you may trigger your doubt. The look that understands you may bring out your depth. And yet, none of them are false. They're just layers waiting to be summoned. Different eyes, different yous. That's why people sometimes say, I feel more like myself around them. This dynamic is built into every social interaction you have. What they mean is that person's look calls forth a version of them that feels more real, more whole, more alive. In that sense, you are never fully autonomous. In conversation, you scan for facial cues, for eye movements, for signs of attention or disapproval. Even when you're speaking, you're also watching, because the eyes across from you are not just listening, they're shaping what you say next, how you say it, and how you feel about yourself while saying it. You are a collaboration between your inner thoughts and the outer eyes that reflect them. You may write a story about yourself, but it's not finished until someone reads it with their eyes and looks back. Let's shift to a more philosophical lens. Phenomenologist Maurice Merleau-Ponty spoke of the gaze as a force that animates us into objecthood. He argued that the act of being seen turns us from pure subject into something visible, knowable, even vulnerable. And here's the paradox. In becoming an object of another's gaze, you're also given the chance to become more fully a subject. When someone looks at you, you become an object in their world, not in the sense of being dehumanized, but in the sense of being real, part of the shared space of existence. You become aware of yourself. You realize, I exist outside my mind. You notice your own being. That's the power of the look. It doesn't just reveal you, it creates you. And yet, not all looks are gentle. Some gaze with judgment, others with indifference. Some look straight through you as if you're not even there, and those looks can unmake you. They can dissolve your confidence. Because if you are partly made by how others see you, you are also unmade when they refuse to see you at all. They can fracture your self-perception. To be ignored is a subtle form of erasure. And so we spend much of our lives, often unconsciously, seeking the look that confirms our preferred version of self. The look that says, yes, this is you, and I see it. We dress a certain way, we speak with a certain tone, we present curated versions of ourselves, all in the hope that someone's gaze will reflect it back to us, solid, valid, and clear. You stir not vain for wanting to be seen. You stir human. You were built for the look. In the mirror, your eyes meet your own, but something's always missing. You can't quite replicate the creative gaze of another. You know the trick. You know it's you looking, And so, it's hard to believe the reflection fully. What happens when you look at yourself? But here sips a deeper question. This is why photographs sometimes surprise you, or recordings of your voice, or videos. You see a version of yourself that wasn't filtered through your internal narrative. It was captured by a machine, or through someone else's lens. The discomfort you feel in that moment is a sign that your identity is not entirely self-generated. You need others to create you in ways you can't do alone. And for a moment you ask, is that really me? But there sips beauty in that too. Because it means you are never done. You are always becoming. It sets a silent co-authorship of existence. Each interaction, each shared glance, is an act of mutual creation. You are made in the eyes of friends, lovers, strangers, and even enemies. And you, in turn, help make them. And you are never becoming alone. So tonight, before the lights go out, think back on the last time someone looked at you in a way that changed how you felt about yourself. Maybe it was a look of admiration, or disappointment, or sudden understanding. Trace how that gaze shaped your mood, your sense of value, your awareness. And then ask yourself this. What kind of look do you offer others? Because your gaze might be the one that creates them. You carry the power to say without words. And in that look, brief or long, soft or sharp, you become not just a person, but a mirror, a sculptor, a light. I see you. You set a real. You exist. And in doing so, you both walk away a little more whole. You walk into a room, and no one turns. No one greets you. No one even shifts to acknowledge that you've entered. You stand in that stillness, uncertain, waiting for some small flicker of notice. A glance, a smile, a nod. But none arrives. The silence feels louder than it should. Your feet feel less grounded. Your breath becomes shallower. You wonder, absurdly, if you've vanished. And in a way, you have. Not physically, but psychologically. Existence, the kind that matters, demands more than breath and heartbeat. It requires attention, and when no one gives it to you, your sense of self begins to flicker, like a light bulb losing power in an empty hallway. This is the strange erosion of being unseen. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts quietly. You find yourself second-guessing the way you speak. You wonder if your ideas are valid, if your presence matters, if your body has weight in the world of others. This isn't about vanity. It's about the fragile bridge between being and being acknowledged. This phenomenon is painfully visible in those who live in long-term solitude. Studies of the elderly in isolated care homes, of inmates in solitary confinement, or even of digital nomads in transient cities, all point to the same thing. Invisibility corrodes identity. You forget how to speak your truth, because no one has asked to hear it. Because a human life is more than internal thoughts. It's a conversation with the outer world, and when that conversation goes silent, we start to unravel. To disappear without dying, that's the most haunting kind of fading. You forget how you move, because no one watches you cross a room. You forget who you are, because no one calls you by name. And it doesn't always require isolation. You can be surrounded by people, and still vanish. When you're overlooked in meetings, passed by on sidewalks, or scrolled past online, a quiet deletion occurs. Each moment chips away at the belief that you matter. Social psychologist Kip Williams coined the term ostracism to describe this invisible disappearance. He and his team conducted a simple experiment. Participants played a virtual ball-tossing game. At first, everyone got the ball equally. Then, suddenly, two players stopped throwing it to the third. The ignored participant, even though the game was clearly fake and no real people were involved, reported feelings of sadness, anger, anxiety, and lower self-worth. Their brain responded as if to physical pain. Being excluded, it turns out, hurts in a way our body can't always locate. And perhaps you've been on both sides of this exchange. But you feel it. You feel it in the slouch of your shoulders, the dryness of your voice, the absence of certainty in your eyes. Perhaps you've been the one ignored, and the one who ignored, not out of cruelty, but out of habit, out of distraction, out of the daily race that makes ghosts of others. You look past the cashier, you step around the janitor, you avoid eye contact with the anxious speaker, fumbling through their point. And in doing so, without malice, you erase. The paradox is that we all long to be seen, yet we all carry the power to unsee. In the age of digital life, disappearance takes on new forms. You post something, a thought, a picture, a confession, and no one responds. The silence isn't neutral. It feels like rejection, not because you seek validation, but because you reached out across the void, and the void shrugged. But what does it mean to disappear without attention in today's world? This isn't narcissism. It sets human wiring. We evolved in tribes, where being seen meant survival, being acknowledged meant inclusion, and being ignored meant danger. Your nervous system still reacts that way, whether you're in a forest clearing or a comment section. But let's zoom out even further. What if this entire reality is a kind of stage? And what if your role only exists when someone is in the audience? When the curtain rises and no one's there to clap, do you still exist? These questions are not meant to crush you. They are meant to stir something. If you walk the world without anyone noticing, have you made an impact? If a tree falls in the forest, and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Perhaps you vanish when you stop noticing yourself. A realization that perhaps you don't vanish when others stop watching. Attention is not only an external gift, it's an internal ritual. When you stop giving attention to your own thoughts, your own body, your own feelings, you begin to fade from your own story. And that's the most dangerous kind of disappearance. Because no amount of outer applause can save you if you've already gone missing inside. So, what's the antidote? Greet the day by seeing yourself. Look in the mirror and linger, not with criticism, not with performance, just with presence. It starts small. Acknowledge your breath, the shape of your hands, the mood that's arrived with you. Then, look outward with intention. Notice the invisible people, the ones behind counters, under uniforms, carrying bags, waiting quietly for someone to say, "I see you." Make eye contact with a stranger and hold it for 1 extra second. Because in seeing them, you return to visibility yourself. The world becomes vivid again. And maybe you heard this before, that to love is to see. To notice is to restore. To see is to revive. But it goes deeper than love. And to attend is to anchor yourself and others in reality. Don't panic. So the next time you feel yourself disappearing, don't shout. Just look. Look for yourself in the reflection of someone else's gaze. Look for the breath inside you, steady and faithful. Look for the smallest detail in the world around you and say, that exists. And by saying that, you're saying, so do I. You see it still here, still visible, still real. Even when no one claps, even when no one posts, even when no one calls your name. Because you remembered to look. And in doing so, you brought yourself back. A child laughs in the park, their joy bouncing across the pavement like a rubber ball. A dog bounds past, chasing something invisible to you but vividly real to them. A street musician strums a melody that no one pauses to hear. You pass through this moment like a shadow among other shadows. And yet, for the briefest flash, someone looks up and meets your eyes. Nothing is said, nothing is exchanged, but something shifts. You exist again. To be seen is to be revived. Not just acknowledged, not merely glanced at, but truly seen, as if your presence has weight, as if your outline is not an afterthought in the world's visual field. And this idea, seen therefore alive, might sound simple, but it fractures everything we thought we knew about consciousness. It calls into question whether existence is something we possess independently, or something we are granted through perception. You've likely heard the phrase, I think, therefore, I am. Descartes' famous proposition that the act of thinking proves one's own existence. But what if that isn't enough? What if you could think and still not exist unless someone else sees you? A terrifying idea. And yet, one we dance around every day. Consider the way memories form. According to cognitive psychology, the memories we retain most vividly are those that were co-witnessed. Events experienced in solitude fade faster, like chalk drawings on a rainy sidewalk. But when someone else is there, even silently, the moment gains permanence. Your brain stores it more completely, as if the shared witnessing gives it permission to stay. This suggests a stunning truth. We outsource our existence. To lovers, to friends, to strangers on a train who saw us cry, to the teacher who said our name, to the sibling who rolled their eyes across the dinner table. Each moment they saw us, they helped record us. Not in ink, not in pixels, but in time. Their gaze kept you from vanishing. This is the core of the looking glass self, a theory by sociologist Charles Horton Cooley, who argued that our self-concept emerges from how we believe others perceive us. You are, in part, who you are because of how others reflect you. But that mirror isn't always kind, and it isn't always accurate. You may be seen through distortion, through bias, through indifference. So what happens when you're only seen as a category, a label, a threat, a role? Are you still alive in that gaze? Or does it pin you down like a butterfly beneath glass, admired, but no longer free? It's not enough to be seen. You must be seen truthfully. Seen not as a projection but as a presence. And that's where things fracture again. Because who gets to define what's true? You live between 1,000 eyes. Each one sees a different version of you. The quiet you, the confident you, the inconvenient you, the inspiring you, the mistake you made, the way you changed, the version they invented, the one they forgot. Are you the sum of all those views? Or are you the one who steps between them, slipping through each moment like light through water? We return, again, to this strange recursion. You only exist when seen. But when everyone sees something different, which you survives? Perhaps this is the reason why some people chase fame. The illusion that being seen by many will stabilize who they are. But in truth, fame splinters the self. You become a myth wearing your own name. On the other end of the spectrum is solitude, chosen or enforced, where you slowly become a ghost, even in your own home. No one knocks, no one texts, no one asks, "Are you still there?" And your mind begins to ask it too. So how do we survive this? How do we stay alive in the absence of witnessing? We must learn to become our own observer. Not in a narcissistic sense, but in the sacred act of noticing, of seeing ourselves with the same reverence we once craved from others. To sit still and say, "I am here." To speak aloud in an empty room and let your own voice confirm your being. To reflect without an audience, and still count the moment as real. Because there will be times when the world is blind to you, when you are left unread, uncalled, unseen, and yet, you must not disappear. Not entirely. Not again. So become the witness you once waited for. Write your thoughts and read them back. Take a photograph of your own hands, and remember what they've built. Look in the mirror and nod, not in vanity, but in proof. You are still here. Not because someone else says so, not because a lens captured you, but because you saw yourself and believed it. And when someone does look your way, when a glance lingers, when a friend listens, when a stranger smiles, let it be an echo, not a rescue. Let it affirm what you already knew, that you are here, you are alive, and you have always been more than a reflection in their eyes. You are the light that makes seeing possible. So now, as the lights dim and the screen of this conversation begins to fade, we return to the haunting question we've carried through every section. Do you exist when no one is watching? Not just in the scientific sense, not just atoms and air and neurons firing in the dark, but in the lived sense, the felt sense, the sense that you are real. Because existence isn't just biology, it's recognition, it's presence that lingers. It's the echo you leave in someone else's mind, and the echo they leave in yours. Throughout this journey, we've explored how perception might not just reveal you, it might create you. That every glance you've received could be a thread stitching you into the fabric of reality. That maybe you are not a single self moving through time, but a kaleidoscope of versions summoned into form only when someone else calls them forth. And maybe that sits terrifying. To think that your presence might rely on someone else's attention. That to be ignored is to slowly dissolve. But there's another side to this, a gentler one. If observation gives you form, then maybe you have always been more than just oneself. Maybe you've existed in every look of love, every nod of respect, every childhood smile that told you yes, you're here, you matter, you are real. And maybe now, in this moment, you're witnessing yourself. By listening this far, by allowing these words to live in your mind, by observing your own reactions, your stillness, your thoughts, your breath, you have become your own witness. And that matters more than any outside gaze. Because when all the lights go out, when no eyes remain to reflect you, when no voices call your name, when the audience leaves, you are still there. You always were. The gaze may shape your edges, but the core, that belongs to you. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember this. You are not disappearing just because no one is looking. You are not fading because the world grew quiet. You are not defined by the camera, the comment, or the crowd. You are here. You are watching yourself. And for now, for always, that is enough. Sleep well, observer. You have always been real, even when no one was watching. Picture a mountain, ancient and unmoved. Now imagine that no living creature has ever laid eyes on it. No one has named it. No one has climbed it. No photograph has captured it. No satellite has mapped it. Would that mountain still exist? Maybe, but in what way? Without observation, is it just potential? A shape without meaning? A presence without history? This isn't just a poetic exercise. It's a question rooted in one of the strangest implications of physics and philosophy alike, that the act of observation doesn't just reveal reality, it creates it. In the early 20th century, physicist Werner Heisenberg proposed his now famous uncertainty principle. It suggests that you cannot simultaneously know both the position and momentum of a particle with perfect precision. Why? Because the very act of measuring one of those properties alters the other. The observer is not neutral. The observer interferes. This principle shattered the illusion of an objective, detached reality. In the quantum realm, to observe something is to change it. To look is to touch. To measure is to disturb. You cannot stand outside the universe and peek in. You are entangled with it. You, the observer, leave fingerprints on the fabric of what's real. But this idea doesn't end in particle physics. It extends all the way up to your everyday life. You don't just witness events, you frame them, you interpret them, you retell them. And in that retelling, reality shifts. No memory is pure. Every time you recall an event, your brain reconstructs it, a process called reconsolidation. What you remember today isn't what happened. It's what you remembered last time. A copy of a copy, and the observer, you, are the editor. This applies to people too. The way you look at someone changes who they are, not because they were always that way, but because your gaze shapes their response. Smile at a stranger, and they become kind. Scowl, and they retreat. Compliment, and they grow. Criticize, and they shrink. The observer is not innocent. The observer is the sculptor. The Rosenthal effect proves this. In a famous 1960s study, teachers were told that certain randomly selected students were expected to bloom academically that year. Unbeknownst to the teachers, these students were chosen at random. But by the end of the year, those students actually performed better. Why? Because the teacher's expectations, their observation, changed the students' reality. They became what was seen in them. Now look in the mirror again. This time not as a question of self-recognition, but of construction. Who do you believe you are? Where did that belief come from? A teacher's praise, a parent's disappointment, a friend's admiration, a stranger's cruelty. You absorbed the reflections of others until they became your architecture. The hue you carry was built by observation, layer by layer. But if that's true, if the observer constructs you, then what part of you is untouched? What remains when no one is watching? Perhaps nothing, or perhaps something deeper, something waiting to be witnessed by a different kind of gaze. The gaze of awareness. Let's turn inward. Meditation practices across cultures emphasize the importance of the observer self, the calm, quiet part of you that notices without judgment. In Vipassana, in mindfulness, in Zen, the goal is not to stop thoughts, but to see them without identifying with them, to observe the self-observing, and in doing so, something paradoxical happens. You vanish. Not in a frightening way, but in a liberating one. The ego dissolves, the roles, the expectations, the constructed identity all fade, and what remains isn't you in the usual sense. It's awareness itself, raw, silent, borderless, the observer behind all observers. But even this awareness, even this stillness, is not passive, it is generative. When you watch your thoughts behave differently. When you notice your breath, your breathing changes. Observation alters the observed. You are the seer and the seen, the dreamer and the dreamed. And maybe that's the truest expression of reality. Because everything you call real, every object, every person, every moment, passes through the filter of perception. Your senses are limited. Your mind is fallible. Your attention is selective. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as you are. So then, what is real? Is the world the same when no one is looking? Is the forest still green when no eye perceives its trees? Or is greenness a construct, a projection, a collaboration between photons and brains? This is the haunting possibility at the heart of idealism. The philosophical position that reality is fundamentally mental, that the physical world is not the foundation, but the echo, that matter is downstream from mind, that to observe is to create. Berkeley believed this. So did Kant, in his own way. And now, strange as it seems, physics is beginning to whisper similar things. Reality is not fixed. It is conditional, provisional, participatory. You are not just a creature inside the world. You are one of the forces building it, with your eyes, your memories, your beliefs, your fears. The observer constructs reality. So ask yourself this: what reality are you constructing right now? Simply by reading this. Are you forming a self? A fear? A question? An opening? This section began with a mountain. Let's return to it. Suppose you go there, climb it alone. You sit on its peak and look around. No one sees you, no one knows, no camera, no journal, no witness. The wind cuts through your jacket. The sky widens, time softens. You exist there, in stillness, unrecorded. And in that moment, the question comes: is the mountain real because you see it? Or are you real because it sees you?